board. We like with the whole thing. It's right to you know, I put all that stuff in the article.
Yeah, absolutely. I met you for the first time in this building, years ago. But we're always in there. Thank you for coming. We'll talk more.
Good morning, everybody. We're about to begin. Begin to settle, find a seat. This is your 90-second notice. You're like, it's about time. This is so fantastic that you all are here today. My name's Chris Mancini. I'm the Executive Director of Save the Harbor, Save the Bay. I just want to start by thanking some of the folks who helped put this together today. Obviously, you're going to hear from Bill Golden, this is his sixth conference on the subject, sixth or seventh, I want to say. Thanks to ESI and Stantec for helping support, for Atlantic Wharf for hosting us today, and Boston Properties, for all the other nonprofit organizations that stepped in, and all of our presenters, like Mass Marine Trades Association, Mystic Charles and Neponset River Watershed Associations, and of course, I gotta go look at the thing here, the Harbor Safety Committee, yeah, of course, and then Nutter, McLennan, and Fish as well for being a support. This is going to be a great morning. I know 4 hours feels like a long time, but we didn't do the whole day, so we essentially have two really substantive panels today with some robust Q&A going on. But what we want to do here on the sixth event of this nature is we've been meeting. Everyone in this room is working on climate resiliency. I would argue that we know what to do, and we are all working together to come together more and figure out how to do it. So really the theme today is going from planning to action. There's so many different geologies and geographies and rivers, oceans, soft shorelines, hard shorelines. How do we bring this all together? How do we finance it? And how do we actually create the incentives and the plan to protect the great infrastructure and the great natural resources that we all share here? So Save the Harbor turned 40 this year. We were very honored to honor Bill Golden, among many others who helped start Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, which helped lead to the Boston Harbor cleanup. And those numbers get tossed around that cost $6 billion. And we've seen anywhere from $30 to $400 billion in a return on investment on that, depending on which statistics you want to use. But even that conservative number is a 5-time return. So we are really glad you're all here. We're going to be counting on all of the people in this room to make all this happen. And we know everyone's well down the road of designing and planning and for these inevitabilities. So with that, I want to introduce the man himself. Thanks, Bill, for inviting Save the Harbor to be a part of this, and welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Good morning. Are we awake? Are we here? Is the coffee doing its thing? Thank you all for coming. As I look around this room, I know probably all of you. There are some, I see some new faces, but we've been at this for a while. We've held our first conference in November of 2013. We held the first national conference on sea level rise, storm surge, and what we called at that point, aging infrastructure. Later we should have added stormwater, of course. But at that point, it was the first time to bring people around the country. Everybody was kind of focused locally in municipalities and different sections of the coast, saying, what's happening here? What's happening? We notice that we're getting more erosion, and we're getting more flooding. More and more of our cities and our towns are vulnerable now. People came from Norfolk. There are 90,000 DOD employees in Norfolk, and they couldn't get to school. They couldn't get to the hospitals at times, sometimes because of flood tides. I saw pictures of houses for sale in Florida. Beautiful house, for sale sign. And that afternoon, the water was up to halfway up the for sale sign. So people knew what was happening, but they didn't know that this was a national issue, that we had to refocus our country from damages to protection and prevention. And slowly that's happened. In Boston itself, I knew from the harbor cleanup many of the people that were involved in the engineering companies and municipal officials, and I talked to them about starting to work on this after the 2013 conference. And they said, yeah, we're at Boston. Nothing's going to happen in Boston. 2016, we had some king tides. My phone was ringing off the hook. Maybe there's something here, Bill, maybe. And that's when the people in this room began to come together. I see people like, well, we talked about Save the Harbor, Save the Bay. 40 years old today, 40 years old. That required a lot of determination and a lot of hard work to not just get the cleanup of Boston Harbor completed, but to do the hard work of making it stay that way. So today we're going to talk about a significant issue. We're going to talk about where we are on this, and we're going to talk about the work that has to be done. And there's a lot of work that has to be done. You know, we're kind of in an era where, especially in this country, not so much in China these days, but in this country, where we just have lost faith that we can do the big things, that we can meet the big challenges. We kind of, you know, go around the edges and work on things, and we plan a lot. But doing the hard things requires political will, so that people in office will take the steps to tell people that this is going to cost money. It's going to be tax money, or it's going to be impact zones, or it's going to be revenue from something, user fees, but it's going to cost you money. And you know, when I was in the legislature, I realized one thing, that the primary, and forgive me, elected officials, but the primary motivation of most elected officials is to stay in office, right? So anything that mitigates against that, telling your constituents that their tax bills are going to be higher, or telling your constituents that their water and sewer bills are going to be higher. Kind of tough to do that, right? So when we filed the lawsuit to clean up Boston Harbor, there had been lots of studies. There had been so many studies that there was a study of how many studies had been done. And we're kind of reaching that point. It's easy to kick it down the road, do another study, and that doesn't really address the problem. It helps kind of laying out what we have to do, making a plan for that, but it doesn't solve the problem. So when I first ran for the Senate, I had just been involved in the creation of the MWRA and all that, and my opponent used to get up on the podium, point at me, and say, that guy has already doubled your water and sewer bill. And they've announced that in 6 months it's going to triple and go beyond that. Don't vote for this guy. He's going to rob every household here. He's going to take all your tax money. And then I would stand up and say, he's right. It's going to cost more. If we want a clean harbor, it's going to cost more. But you kids in Quincy and in Southie and in Eastie, who can't go swimming without getting a red eye and getting all kinds of problems. You can't go to Nantucket or the Vineyard on the weekends, so you're going to have to swim there. So let's make that clean. And if you want somebody that has the guts to take the actions that are necessary, that is the person that can control that process, that can direct that process, that has the interest and the passion and the information and the expertise to do it right, so that you don't pay any more for it. And one of the things I'm really proud about is how the team of people over the years that it took to clean up Boston Harbor kept the costs down. They kept the costs down. They kept their faith with the people. And they completed, compared to Big Dick, they completed that project on time and on budget. We're still working a little bit on the CSOs, I know that, but you know, it was a big success, going from the dirtiest harbor to the cleanest harbor. So what are the takeaways for you today? Well, the takeaway is pretty simple. It's time. It is time. We stopped planning. CCM put that right on the top of their coastal resilience plan. Final plan. It's time for action. Now, there are certain missing links between action and implementation, and you'll hear a lot about that today. There is governance structure. There is financing. There is political will. But we have to focus ultimately on the cost of doing nothing and the cost of delay. What that's going to mean to us as a society, 15% of the tax base is right over on the other side of Fort Point Channel. 15%. I don't know if you've been on a flood tide and looked at the seaport. Maybe like a little like that on just a normal tide. It's coming. It is coming. So we have this opportunity. I was in Sandy. I had my lightship down there. Barometer was dropping. The skies were darkening, and so we took the ship out for Sandy. But when I came back, I wish everyone in Boston could have been there on the day that I came back into the port of New York, with the second ship allowed back in. It was to see cars floating in parking garages, to see the entire water sheet and waterfront just wiped out, to see the tunnels filled with water. They thought it was just electrical plumbing damage. It turned out that the salt water had destroyed the concrete in these tunnels. So that devastation, thank God we haven't hit it yet, although 2018 was a wake-up call, right? That was a wake-up call. GE headquarters, just around the corner, right? We'd competed for that. It was like an Olympic competition. You know, the governor, the mayor out there popping champagne. We won the headquarters to GE. 2 months later, after cutting the ribbon, the site flooded. So it's not only coming, it's here. So what is the takeaway from this? The takeaway is to get to work. Stop planning. There are some areas that still need some planning. You'll hear about the DPAs here. There's still some work on the waterfront and the water sheet, and you'll hear from the working waterfront professionals that focus on that. But for most part, we know what we have to do. We know what we have to do. And without further ado, I'd like to call up the first 4 speakers, Julia Knisel, Nayelli Rodriguez, Captain Robert McCabe, and Julie Wood. Julie may be able to wait, I think, but the others, if you could come up on the panel. I think we missed one of our sponsors, Global Watch, in the introduction. So I think Captain Cuneo is here somewhere. Yep, Global Watch, thank you for your continuing support.
And MADDPA, I forgot that.
MADDPA.
Sorry.
MADDPA's here.
Massachusetts Alliance for the Defense of Designated Port Areas. A strong voice, and probably the first voice for the working waterfront. You know.
This is a panel. You want everyone to?
Yeah, anyone can come. It's not, individual speakers, but, And while we're just organizing, there are always little technical issues here. Like yesterday, and my computer is encrypted. It doesn't like anything connected to it, so we solved that one this morning. There will be, just to go through the agenda, there will be a 15-minute break after the first group here speaks. And look at your agenda. Please do not take off for your workplace or go to another location. The first section here is on planning, essentially. The second is what do we have to do. So it's worth sticking around. There's also question and answer periods. Please feel free to ask whatever questions you have. Our first speaker is Julia Knisel. She's the Coastal Shoreline and Floodplain Manager for the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. And she has, we have this ability to get rock stars in our government. They don't get paid all that well, but without them, we wouldn't move the Commonwealth ahead at all. And Julia has a very interesting background and is all over the country. If you look up her name, you'll see that she's speaking on Nantucket. She's speaking on the North Shore. She's speaking on the South Shore. She has been all around spreading the word and working on this plan. So with that, no further ado, Julia.
I'm really happy to join this conversation today and really appreciate Bill's acknowledgement of the nuance of the final plan for Resilient Coasts. I didn't know that many people would pick up on that. How many people have actually participated in any Resilient Coasts planning meetings or cracked open at least the executive summary? So the majority of people, so I'm very happy about that. And my role this morning is to provide you a little update on how we structured the plan in order to really promote collective action on managing coastal flooding and erosion as we're experiencing accelerated sea level rise and stronger storms along the coast. We released the plan back in November, and we were actually very fortunate to have some funding this spring in order to start the implementation of the plan with our 78 coastal communities. We base our plan implementation on coastal resilience districts. We delineated 15 of those, as you all know from reading the plan. Those are largely based on natural resource areas, watershed units, the nature of development within the communities, as well as industries in the different regions of our coast. And we put forward an opportunity this January, February timeframe for communities to come together and at least start to look at how to collaborate across municipal boundaries, and if they were ready to actually help accelerate a project. We saw amazing response from communities. 11 of our 15 districts stood up and said, yes, we're willing to try and figure out what this process is. And we actually have 12 projects that have been funded this spring with the support of a whole slew of consultants. Some of you are in the room. We pre-qualified 6 vendor teams that have a bunch of subs that are helping the communities with not only wrestling with what has been stated in past planning efforts, but also, looking forward, where do we see efficiencies in terms of working together? Where can we save time and money in order to work on areas of the coast that are most vulnerable to the most number of people and sectors? So the types of projects, let me just get to the slides here. We can jump through forward there. So here we are, jumping ahead here. So the types of projects that we're talking about that really could benefit from regional collaboration, both amongst municipalities, state agencies, and federal agencies, as well as the private sector. Not surprisingly, transportation infrastructure. That's the first one that people think of in terms of regional benefits, where we can really make the most impact on the ground in order to save people during a major storm event, but also to keep critical assets online during these major storm events. We also are thinking about regional sediment management. Save the Harbor, Save the Bay really values the urban beaches. And how do we work to make those types of projects less costly and be able to be implemented in a more timely manner and be able to be maintained? And where does placement of sediment in our eroding systems really provide the most benefit to the public, not only in terms of recreation, but also infrastructure protection? We have a lot of failing seawalls along the coast, And those walls were put in place because there was an asset behind it that could not tolerate any kind of sediment exchange. We also are talking about nature-based solutions. In a number of our communities, we're looking at where we can help facilitate resource migration, where we would collectively, with a number of different projects across a region, provide the most benefits in terms of maintaining systems that we might be losing with the changing environments. And we also are talking about possible relocation. How do we look at that question in a voluntary manner in order to be able to help facilitate moving vulnerable people out of harm's way? We were able to kickstart these projects with a modest amount of funding. We do anticipate being able to offer additional services next fiscal year, and we are excited about that. I'm going to jump ahead to just highlighting the districts that are starting to take action. So from north to south, we have communities within the Great Marsh region that are dipping their toes in where does a collection of nature-based approaches potentially provide regional benefits? Where can multiple communities within a region say yes? Like, we agree that prioritizing a project in another community really provides benefit to the whole region. And also looking at vulnerable transportation infrastructure and thinking about how that needs to be redesigned with different volumes of water. Moving down the coast, we have the mid-North Shore region. The communities in that region are really looking at how to message climate change information and its interface with the economy, housing, and make sure that we are talking to members of our community in a consistent way so we can have broad support for implementation. Excuse me. In Boston, greater Boston area, we have a number of projects that are looking at the role of the insurance industry, which Nayelli and Charlie can talk more about later. We are looking at extending the ClimateReady Boston into the Boston Harbor Islands, moving down into the Quincy area, again, looking at all of the work that's already been done and all the plans by the communities and seeing where we have some commonalities and we can really prioritize implementation. Nature-based solutions down on the South Shore, and then down in Buzzards Bay. Getting communities that aren't exposed as frequently to coastal storms to get together and have a conversation about shared priorities is amazing. And then out on the Cape, we have a couple of large-scale beach nourishment conversations happening. What beaches should be prioritized for placement, and do we have enough sediment in the system to nourish those beaches? And then finally, out on the islands, this might be my favorite project. I don't want to be biased, but Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and Gosnold are having a joint conversation about the shared vulnerability of all of the landings, the ferry landings, and how during a storm they can make sure that not only people that want to evacuate can, but that critical supplies can also make it onto the islands to make sure that we are providing the services that are needed during response time, but also when it's time to recover as well. So that's a whirlwind tour of all of the excitement that's happening along our 78 coastal communities this spring, and we're really hoping to continue the momentum moving forward with the approval of the bond bill and all of the strategies that are included in there. So in terms of Resilient Mass Plan, Resilient Coasts was an action that we included in that plan, so we were happy to check off the completion of that action. And I want to highlight, just for the Save the Harbor, Save the Bay region, that if you haven't checked out the DCR Parkway Vulnerability Assessment and Adaptation Strategies, do take a look at that. That was also a recommendation in the original Climate Adaptation and Hazard Mitigation Plan. And we're also having some really good conversations with communities about voluntary relocation as well as elevation. And MEMA has been working with a team of consultants on looking at how to frame a program in order to help do those buyouts and elevations. So that's something that's going to be continuing over the next year. And in terms of timing for new information on climate science and impacts along the coast and across the Commonwealth, we are looking at 2026 for the next climate science report, 2027 for the next climate change assessment. That's really where we're looking at the exposure of all of our assets to these changing conditions. And then finally, the 5-year update to the Resilient Mass Plan will be signed in 2028. So there's a lot of opportunities over the next few years to plug into these processes and to make sure that we really are focused on implementation. So thank you.
Let me talk about CZM just for a moment. We are so fortunate to have done world-class planning in this state. We are way ahead of most of the country in this. And it's CZM that has led the way on this. I remember Rich Delaney when he was one of the early appointments here, and we've attracted enormously talented people since then. But the plan, we've gone through several courses of planning, 1.0, 2.0, but this plan was the most comprehensive and from the show of hands reached the majority of people that are stakeholders and focused on this project. It was an extraordinary outreach program. As you'll hear, ClimateReady Boston has done the same thing. And that's where the power lies. People like Julia can lead, but the power comes from all of you. And if you're not participating in these programs, we have the brightest and the best in leading us. We have to empower them with our support. We are very fortunate to have the power that's sitting here representing the interests that you'll hear from today. Julia is an extraordinary lady. She is, I'm sorry, I have to talk up. She is an extraordinary lady. And my secret to success has been to surround me with strong, intelligent women and get out of their way, right? And in doing this, it's a pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Nayelli Rodriguez. When I say we get the best talent, we get them wherever we can find them. And in case of Nayelli's situation, Nayelli is a member of the Lipan?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Now, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Is a member of the Lipan Apache tribe, is that right? And we stole her from Texas. So while Texas is going blue, we're getting more blue from bringing up Texans here. She has a master's degree from MIT. She is an urban planner, worked for Sasaki, right, before gracing ClimateReady Boston. She is the Deputy Director of the City of Boston Office of Climate Resilience. Great to have you here.
Or maybe it won't. So as Bill mentioned, I'm Nayelli Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Climate Resilience in the City of Boston. Our office, it builds on the legacy of the ClimateReady Boston efforts that many of you guys are a part of. And the office was kind of rebranded to demonstrate that it's kind of the front door, a one-stop shop for all of our constituents and stakeholders engaging the city in all of the challenges around climate resilience. Obviously, we're one office and we do that work in partnership with a lot of different offices. Our team, some of whom are here today, I saw Kat, Delaney, and Ben from the BPDA team as well. It's a team effort, and our office is just one of the groups in the city that focuses on this issue. So yeah, again, I'm going to paint a picture with words here. If you were seeing an image that was originally intended here, it was going to show a kind of like the legacy of the past decade of climate and resilience planning that Boston has engaged in. So Boston has been doing resilience planning for over a decade at this point, and that planning work is the foundation for what the conversation is moving towards today, which is how we move from planning to resilience. And the question is now how we take everything that we planned for and actually build it. all of the community engagement and public conversations that went into that planning effort are the foundation for that now. So just like a brief setup for those who are unfamiliar or need a refresher, Boston is 1/6 constructed land, so we are on filled tidelands, and with 9 inches of sea level rise expected by the 2030s, what today is a once-in-a-century storm becomes something that we can expect to happen once in a decade by the 2030s. So when we first made the ClimateReady Boston plans, we were projecting out to the 2030s. That is less than one capital planning cycle away at this point. And so, this is going to happen someday, has a different context nowadays, because, we're entering the 2030s, the decade that we first started to make these projections. So that changes the context a little bit. As many of you all participated in 2017, Boston produced 5 local resilience plans for each of our coastal neighborhoods. And together they established what Boston is trying to protect, for whom, and roughly how. And to give you a little bit of a tour of those plans, again, I can try to paint a picture with words. Our coastal neighborhoods are so important to us, and the first one that was up was one of the hardest ones to plan for, I would say. East Boston and Charlestown Phase 1. That neighborhood is challenging because East Boston in particular is surrounded on 3 sides by water, significant environmental justice population, with a lot of people who face significant barriers to engaging in the planning process, and also are at a greater level of risk because their environmental justice community, a lot of language, the English, a learned language there, a large immigrant community, so some structural barriers to engaging in the process. Charlestown added another challenge because of the unique context of working with the National Park Service and DCR and the Navy Yard's unique kind of public-private ownership. So that was some of the issues going on in East Boston. For South Boston, the South Boston plans and stakes were really regional and not just local. The neighborhood scale of that project extends to 11 MBTA stations, the I-90 entrances, major hospitals, and also the commercial fishing pier. So South Boston, a totally different planning context with its own unique challenges. In 2020, we moved to downtown and the North End. $2 billion projected flood loss scenario by the end of the century. Roughly 30,000 people live in that neighborhood, and obviously that audience expands even further if you consider the 50,000 workers who are based there by the 2070s, in the floodplain by the 2070s. And then by mid-century, without action, Atlantic Avenue is projected to see monthly traffic closures from tidal flooding, and then by 2070, downtown and north end flood pathways actually emerge or converge at high tide, becoming kind of like a single flood event. So that's a complex area, as many of you know. We're in it now, and one of the most complex ownership and jurisdictional pictures across any of our neighborhoods. And then the last neighborhood plan was Dorchester, which is Boston's largest and most diverse neighborhood. The Neponset River estuary is an incredible ecological resource and also a flood pathway, which is a unique context to contend with. And the community priorities in Dorchester, they differed in every neighborhood, but something that came through loud and clear is a tension that never really goes away in this work, which is preserving access to the waterfront as a shared resource, and also making sure that the solutions that are implemented advance equity and don't accelerate displacement. And that's something that we come back to in this work time and time again. So together, those plans documented not just the risks, but also the community aspirations for what this work should build. And the question, then became, where do we start? And in Boston, we started with parks. Parks were an ideal way to begin, moving from planning to implementation because they provided 3 things that are kind of unique. Public waterfront, and we'll get back a little bit to how Boston, the city doesn't actually own a lot of Boston's waterfront, so parks were a unique place where we actually had the space to build and enact. Community relationships already embedded in a lot of those areas, and then obviously a lot of our parks are located in the neighborhoods that were most at risk, so it was a natural place to start. So as we moved from projects and started to build momentum and implementation, we're really close right now to Martin's Park. You can almost see it if you look out the window. I think that was a really great example that set the tone for what our ambition was in terms of moving from planning to implementation, because it really demonstrated, it was a proof of concept that you could build resilient infrastructure into a place and have people really love that place. That's such a meaningful memorial to the child who was killed in the marathon. It doesn't feel like a piece of infrastructure. It feels like a really valued and amazing community space. And so that set the tone that we could pull through to future projects. After that came Langone Park in the north end, which raised the bar. We had a very complicated brief there. The community had their priorities, which included recreation, waterfront access, preservation of parking, and obviously the city had identified that we needed flood resilience, and so what resulted was a hybrid of green and gray infrastructure, these living systems, which are layered on top of pretty complicated engineering systems, and they really kind of like met the moment to address both the community need and the city's mandate to build a more resilient park. McConnell Park in Dorchester, which you'd be seeing incredible images of right now, but instead of seeing them on a screen, I encourage you to just go visit them in person. That extended that approach from Langone Park for how you build an amazing and valued community space and fold the climate resilience into the design. Notably, both of those parks were already in the design pipeline when the 2018 nor'easter storms arrived and flooded out both sites. And those storms, in addition to every storm subsequent, I think have really demonstrated through kind of like the images and the lived experience of everybody who engages with those spaces that climate change, sea level rise, and storm surge are not something that are going to happen eventually, but something that are continually happening. And speaking of going from planning to implementation, while none of us are trying to advocate for the next big storm to hit, I think we have to acknowledge that the reality of living through those storms does something that planning documents can't really do, right? Like we can point to those examples of things that are already happening in the neighborhoods and really create a sense that we need to act now. So after Langone and McConnell, we moved to Pierce Park Phase 2 in East Boston. East Boston was a great place to have an early implementation project as well, because that neighborhood is such a coastal neighborhood and has coastal in its identity. But for a long time, I think for many community members, that was something that happened at a distance. Even though they're a coastal neighborhood, the coast wasn't something that they were able to engage with regularly, and Pierce Park Phase 2 was an example of how we were trying to address that and have residents be able to interact with the waterfront in a way that wasn't about managing a threat, but creating an opportunity for connection. And then, transitioning into the projects that are in construction now, Ryan Playground in Charlestown is an example of kind of where the work is moving now, because we have 47 miles of coastland. Sorry, I thought you were giving me a notice to wrap it up. We have 47 miles to go, or a total of coastland in Boston. We have these 4 parks that have been completed and 1 under construction now. It's being designed or being constructed to tie into what the U.S. Army Corps district scale design for coastal resilience will be. And that's a kind of an example of where we're moving now in the next chapter of this work. If you guys want to see more about all those projects, you should go to boston.gov/climate_resilience. You can see our coastal resilience implementation page and see all the latest of what the team is doing. And just to wrap up, I'll talk about scaling where we're going now. The city has committed more money than ever before in its capital plan, $150 million to coastal resilience. That was allocated with a clear strategy in mind, that we were going to seek state, federal, outside grants, and then use that money as a matching fund. Obviously, we are now entering a period of extended uncertainty with regard to federal grants. We are still pursuing those grants, and we're going to continue to just pull every fruit off of that tree. Lewis Mall in East Boston is still being funded through the HMGP program from FEMA, so that's a bright spot. Moakley Park was funded through BRIC, then BRIC went away, maybe BRIC's coming back now. We're not walking away from that strategy because we can't afford to leave any money on the table. But fortunately, we also kind of have this other strategy, which has always been in place, and that's this partnership with the U.S. Army Corps. Even a full stack of city, state, and competitive federal grant funding was never going to get us to the full scale of build out that we knew that we need. And so that's why we always had this Army Corps project kind kind of simmering in the background, and now it's kind of entering a new phase that we can talk about. First, I want to say I'm not going to go into full detail about the Army Corps project because we're going to have a deep engagement about that work that's led by my colleague Kate Rosa, who's also here today, kicking off in July. You may have already met her in some of our community events. There's going to be a lot of conversations about the Army Corps project this July, and I want to make time for those conversations to happen kind of more deeply and more, specifically when the draft release comes out. But what I will say about the Army Corps project is that it kind of extends this approach that the city has to identify resources, match them to our own, to extend and expand the amount of money that we have to build out all of these projects and really realize our vision. The Army Corps is a 6-year partnership. We have to abide by the Army Corps' very specific planning process, which requires a lot of analysis up front, a report that then gets approved by Congress, and then federal funds that would be appropriated kind of on a 2-year basis, every 2 years rolling, starting in 2028. And so we still have a little bit of a ways to go in that process. This summer, like I said, the draft release is coming out. But the reason why this partnership makes sense is that we are aligned in the things that we want to protect. The Army Corps protects the federal interest. Boston agrees that it's important to protect housing, to protect people, infrastructure, and critical assets. We have ambitions beyond the federal interest as well. We want to also invest in an abundant public realm and all of the economic and social opportunities that come along with building up our waterfront. So our approach is to take the Army Corps investment in basic infrastructure. They can provide up to a 65% federal match. The project estimated costs, the floor for these projects is $10 billion. And so 65% match of that gets us pretty far. We're pretty enthusiastic about that. But that only gets us to kind of like the base layer of infrastructure that we're looking to build. Beyond that, to create this abundant public realm that we really imagine, we're gonna have to bring even more money to the table. And I think we're gonna talk about some of the strategies to do that today. So I want to put a pause and speak about the Army Corps and talk about kind of like the missing pieces that Bill alluded to earlier. I would say that we have kind of like, well, 3 major gaps that I'll discuss that the original ClimateReady Boston plans and the Army Corps also can't really cover. And that's what we sort of need the help of everybody in this room to put your heads together and help us address. The first one is maintenance. It's like the most important, least important thing. It's never in the press release. It's, you know, the last thing in the budget, the first thing to get cut. But it really is such an important commitment that we make when we say that we want to build a resilient, abundant public realm along our waterfront. I sometimes like have this like reference in my head. I call it the half-drunk dunks problem, because you can cut a ribbon on a multi-million-dollar park, and if there's like a Dunkin' Donuts cup swirling around in a bioswale on day 2, people are gonna, I think rightly, question your ability to follow through on your investments. And so we really need help making sure that the places that we build through all these partnerships are well maintained, not only on day 2, but on year 15, who's inspecting these coastal resilient berms and flood walls, and who's making sure that they remain well-maintained spaces that are welcoming to the public, because that's the way that they're really going to endure over time. So the second thing I would say is governance. Boston, as I mentioned before, doesn't have a single accountable entity for its entire waterfront. 50% of Boston's coastline is state managed. 30% is privately owned, 16% is the city, and 4% is federal. So that's a lot of stakeholders to work together with across 47 miles. Governance, I know, is a hot topic in this room today and in this field. We are working on it, and we need to work on it more, because all of those pieces have to move together for the entire system to work. And then the last piece I'll talk about is financing the gap. So the federal cost share gets you the resilient infrastructure from the federal interest perspective, and that's important. But like I mentioned, Boston has an obligation and I think an aspiration to go beyond just purely what's in the federal interest and really think about the type of waterfront that we're creating, who we're creating it for, and what's the vision that we see for the future. So I think we want to be expansive and ambitious when we are moving from planning to implementation of these ClimateReady Boston plans. That's going to take even more money. The Green Ribbon Commission is our partner in developing a funding and financing blueprint for coastal resilience. It's due in 2027. I encourage all of you to read the information about that plan and give us your input on it. That is going to be hopefully a bit of an indicator for how we can raise the additional funds that are going to take us beyond just infrastructure into this resilient harbor vision that we all share. And so I will just close with a call to action for this room, because I know that this is a room full of advocates who have been engaged in this space for a really long time. And the advocacy that got us through the planning phase was about vision and values and reminding people of this sense of urgency. But the advocacy at this phase is a little bit different. It's about operations, it's about institutional design and financing structures, it's about who pulls the Dunkin' Donut cup out of the bioswale in 15 years. All of that's super important. It's not that glamorous, but it's also not new to Boston. So 40 years of harbor cleanup, there's a lot of coalition building, institutional design, financing, and a lot of advocates who stayed at the table for decades. We're going to need that again, and so we're looking forward to working with all of you on that.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Nayelli. That was comprehensive and terrific. The next speaker, I want to get right to him because he's time constrained a little bit. He's got to get out of here. But I want to stop for a moment in identifying the speaker. Captain McCabe is going to give you a different perspective. For most people living on and near the water is a viewscape. It's beautiful. If you're really adventurous, maybe you get out in a kayak or a sailboat or a small motorboat and you enjoy it. But there is a tradition, a culture, and strong leadership in Boston for the working waterfront. The people that every day deliver everything we need, from jet fuel to Costco goods to whatever. And that often comes with a great deal of danger, a great deal of risk, and a great deal of skill. Next speaker is a Boston Harbor pilot. He's also Vice President of the Maritime Association for the Defense of DPAs, designated port areas. And he's going to talk a little bit about a kind of gap in the planning here, the working waterfront and the watershed. I introduce to you Captain McCabe.
Thanks, Bill. Technically, I'm not the Vice President of MADDPA, but I drew the short straw and had to be here today. Our guru is not able to be here today. He's had prior commitments. Bob Blair is really fine-tuned on talking about MADDPA and what MADDPA is. And MADDPA is the Marine Alliance for Defense of Designated Port Areas. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a state commission Boston Harbor pilot. I hold a U.S. Coast Guard Unlimited Master's license. I sailed for 13 years. I went to Maritime. I was the captain of a hopper dredge for 9 years. You know, and that job was beach replenishment and channel maintenance. So I know the importance of channel maintenance and dredging and beach replenishment. You know, you save the beach, people come, right? I'm also a board member of the Boston Propeller Club and a 27-year member of the Boston Marine Society. So the question really is, how did MADDPA come about? And it started at the Boston Marine Society. There was an article in the Boston Globe about a soccer stadium coming to Everett. And everyone looked at each other and said, how did this happen? How is a soccer stadium going to be built in the DPA? And you know, through channels and networks, the money got its way, and there's going to be a soccer stadium in Everett. And the other question we asked was, who's looking out for the DPAs? Well, no one is. No one cared to look. You know, the state's supposed to look out for them, but it got sidetracked, and so MADDPA became 3 years ago became formed, and like I said, our guru Bob Blair took the helm of it, and it has run crazy with it, and it's grown. We are now 25 over 25 businesses are members of the MADDPA Association. And what we do is we advocate with the state, and you know, we just want to be a good partner. You know, we're not looking to make money. You know, no one in MADDPA is going to make any money off of future growth in Boston Harbor or Gloucester Quincy. You know, we want to save the working waterfront. We realize the importance of the working waterfront. You know, if we lose the working commercial waterfront, we're screwed, you know, to put it bluntly. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to go out to San Diego for a working waterfront conference. And the working waterfront, it's a broad term. It can, you know, can be from a container terminal to a guy who has an agreement with the neighbor to walk down to the waterfront and clam. You know, that's the working waterfront. I don't think there's clamming in Boston, but
Not yet.
not yet. Not yet. But we have to keep moving forward with it. Carnley Terminal, you know, ships are getting bigger. Carnley saw that years ago, and they spent just shy of $1 billion investing in dredging, you know, through state and federal money, invested in dredging, invested in terminal expansion. And you know, when I started piloting 20 years ago, you know, a big container ship was 965 feet by 106 feet wide. You know, today they're 1,200 feet by 160 feet wide. So that's big growth. And if they didn't make that expansion, Massport didn't see to make that expansion, it'd probably be dried up as a container terminal. And the Carnley outreach for jobs touches about 2,500 people, maybe more. And then there's Black Falcon across the way as well that touches numerous jobs. And these jobs are good paying jobs, and that's what the Working Waterfront provides. Chelsea Creek, 75% of the petroleum products that come into that come into Chelsea Creek, Chelsea Creek reaches 75% of the region's petroleum needs. Without that, you know, I know we want clean energy, but you know, petroleum is still a necessity. There's a direct pipeline to Logan, Chelsea Creek. Things that we need constantly. Gloucester, active seaport at one point. Today it's near dead, you know, because they didn't invest in infrastructure. They didn't invest in dredging. These things. I know Salem, when the power plant shut down, they were all set to put condos up, you know, and a guy named Bob Blair, who's our leader today, stepped forward and said, look, this isn't a DPA, you can't do this. We need to preserve the working waterfront. And he saved Salem. You know, so issues with DPAs today is money. You know, money's the driving force, how to get money. If someone owns a DPA property today and they think condos are their answer, you know, how do you save that? How do they get money to make it a working marine commercial waterfront, you know? Permitting is a huge problem. I know Massport doesn't have a problem. I think they can kind of do what they want, but you know, for permitting, I know it takes, you know, you want to do anything on the water, it takes years. If you were to take a boat ride around Boston Harbor, you know, some of it's kind of embarrassing. It's very beautiful. I'm very fortunate to work there, but you know, the fact of the matter is, you're going to drive by places like Pierce Park, you know, that have derelict dock areas, you know, just rotting pilings in the water, you know. How do you get rid of those and turn them into something profitable? Takes a lot of money. Boston and Quincy have derelict shipyards, dry docks available to that could be rehabbed to work, but no one wants to step up and front the money for that. You know, so DPAs, designated port areas, you know, if they become condos in mall areas, you're not going to get them back. You know, no one's going to knock down a condo to put up a working waterfront. You know, so this is really about the future. It's not about today. It's the future of building a safe, clean, working waterfront, and which the state needs. You know, Boston's been a thriving seaport for years, and And without it, you lose commerce. Like Bill said, everything that comes into Boston goes out all over the place. The cruise terminal handles over 130 cruise ships a year. These are big numbers that affect a lot of people with jobs. And so the DPAs, we want to protect the DPAs, save the working waterfront, and help the Commonwealth grow. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Captain. It is shocking how much working waterfront we have lost. Now, that doesn't mean we should go back to World War II days and have huge naval installations in Boston. But there are areas that if they go condo or if they go some other use, we are never getting them back. I spent 10 years in Asia. I used to go into China on a diplomatic Hong Kong passport and talk to Chinese generals over there. They're the same guys today, but they're wearing Armani suits. But back then, China was a second-rate power. They have become a first-rate power because they have understood the value of their merchant marine, and they produce 80% of all marine shipping now. South Korea has a little bit of it. We've got virtually none of it. We do defense shipbuilding, subs and ships, but that's it. So, we talk about environmental issues. As you know, I'm probably as green as Kermit the Frog, and I've been at this for a long time, but I'm also concerned about our economy and our national defense. We have to invest in these facilities. We have to keep them. The Quincy Shipyard, Margaret Forrest is here, the resiliency officer at Quincy, who is also the president of the organization that maintains and owns the Salem, the cruiser that was made there. So when Captain Bob talks about the importance of this is not just to the city of Boston, it is not just to New England, it is a national issue. There's going to be, we had the head of MARAD here 2 weeks ago at a Boston Marine Society function. He was terrific. And the vision is to get us back in the game. And there's going to be trillions of dollars invested in it. We don't want to have big shipyards, but if we maintain our DPAs, we can knit together a group of manufacturing, high-tech and actual shipyards like in Fall River, and we can actually build ships again, components of them, components of nuclear submarines. We can do it all here and add to the good jobs, and at the same time, as Nayelli was saying, whenever you build anything on the waterfront, and ClimateReady Boston has been just a champion on this, you build in resiliency, right? It's an opportunity. So DPAs are an opportunity for big resiliency as well. So, Captain, thank you for what you're doing. We are now cooking in to see if we've solved our technical problems. But let me ask you to keep an eye on MADDPA. MADDPA is the only organization focused on not only DPAs, but our working waterfronts. Do you know that we do not have in government, in Massachusetts, any person who's in charge of the working waterfront? We have 2 people, now maybe 2, that work for the T on the ferries. They are the only marine people that are in government at the state level. None in the Department of Transportation other than 2 working for the ferries. So that's how little we have focused on this. But with MADDPA and the growing power of MADDPA, we're going to regain that control of the working waterfront. So I am pleased to say that thanks to my engineering excellence of Joel Paulsen, we have solved the problem. And now, Julie, I had the great pleasure of working for the Charles River Watershed Association, which is headed by Emily. Do you know, you guys all know Emily, don't you? Yeah, hands. She's a power, force to be reckoned with, but the brain trust behind her is right here, standing right here. Julie thought she was going to retire about 10 years ago from the Charles River Watershed Association, and Emily said, you are the Charles River Water Association. So with no further ado, Julie Wood.
Thank you. Is this working? Excellent. Okay. All right. Thank you
so much, Bill, and thank you, Joel, for helping with the slides. Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to see so many familiar faces and partners in the audience. I'm going to take us upstream a little bit into the Charles, the water that we are sending down into Boston and down into our coasts. But all the same themes come out of our work that have already been covered today. We need regional partnership. We need to start working now. And I'm very sorry I can't stay for the afternoon session. It's just that time of year. But the funding and the political will conversations are so important. So a little bit about Charles River Watershed Association. Hopefully you've all heard of us. But if you haven't, our mission is to protect and restore the Charles River and our watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. Sorry, got cut off in my slides. The Charles is 80 miles long. It is not just the 9 miles that divides Cambridge and Boston. Yes, that is our showcase, our picture perfect part of the river, but please explore upstream if you haven't had a chance yet. Watershed area is 308 square miles, 35 cities and towns. So when we talk about working together, 35 cities and towns have got to come together. Each and every decision that are being made at the local level have a potential to impact what is happening downstream and what water we're sending down to our neighbors. And like the conversations around Boston and the coast, significant environmental justice population. 60% of the watershed's population lives in environmental justice areas. We have always taken a watershed view. That's now more important than ever as we're facing these challenges of climate change. I also want to acknowledge that the work that we're doing is on the land of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. Charles River Watershed Association is forming relationships with our tribal residents and working with them as we build climate resilience into our landscape. In about 2019, we started the Charles River Climate Compact. This was where we put out an invitation to our communities to say, hey, would you guys like to come together and work on things in partnership? And we legitimately just put this invitation out, did not know what the response was, and it was an overwhelming yes. So we were very happy to get that response. Once folks expressed the willingness, we dove a little deeper and we asked, what are the challenges you're facing? And what challenges would make sense to work on with your partners as a region, as a watershed? And no surprise maybe to the folks in this room, flooding rose to the top of that list. So there's our mission statement. Basically all of the communities that are fully or at least half or more in the Charles are participating. So we're very excited with what we've been able to do with this group. The very first thing we did was take on this flooding challenge. So we worked with partners, some of whom are in the room, our Boston folks, Lee from Crew back there, to develop a Charles River flood model. Prior to this, so this is just about 5 years ago, prior to developing the Charles River flood model, cities and towns in our watershed did not know what to expect from climate change. We knew we were going to have more rain. There was a lot of national and local research around that. But what did that actually mean in our communities? We didn't have that information. Yet we were making land use and planning decisions every single day with that data gap. So we put together this technical tool that lets us know where and when flooding will occur. It also lets us test out solutions, and that's where I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about solutions because we have identified them. But at the very basic level, what we wanted to do at the beginning, where and when will flooding happen? So we developed the Charles River flood model, full data democracy here with this. We ran a bunch of different current day storm scenarios as well as future storm scenarios, put all the data up on our web, shows depth of flooding, location of flooding, extent of flooding at the watershed scale. Now our communities have this as a tool that they can use for their planning and decision making. This is all on our website too, so if you don't get the picture or you want to check out a different neighborhood, all available to you. The watershed approach, something Charles River Watershed has been doing since 1965 when we were founded, but as I previewed, now more than ever is when we really need to lean into this. If you are only looking in Boston, your toolkit is going to be limited when we're talking about the scale of flooding that we are facing. We have to take a regional approach to this problem. So us, by taking a watershed approach, we can look up at the headwaters. Can we store more water there? In the middle of our watershed, are there spots where we can improve conveyance and also build in storage? Once you get down to the downstream, there may just be no other place to go than to try and move that water. So having that upstream and middle watershed in your toolbox is so critical for actually addressing flooding when we're talking about, again, the scale of water that we're expecting to come. So the watershed model allowed us to really lean into solutions. One solution that I haven't heard a lot of talk about today, but I will give a plug for, is regulations. We found, so I'll walk through this graph just so you can see kind of where the big picture is. But takeaway, the most effective solution that we found that we tested was implementing strong stormwater regulations that weren't just looking at water quality, where maybe you're trying to capture that first inch and filter it, but you're actually having private entities build storage as they develop. This is happening and this is working, and if we keep doing it, it will continue to work. So to walk through to this graph, this is our existing today. This is our future, 2070. Volume of water coming down the Charles if we did nothing. So today's volume of water if we do nothing. You can see it goes way up. That's because we're going to get more rain. Then we tested out 3 different things. One we call the Watertown rule. In Watertown, they require development to store the 100-year flood on site. And they are doing this, and it is working, and development is still happening. That's 8 inches of rain runoff that they have to store on site. Waltham, another watershed community, has now followed suit. So a developer that wants to do business in Watertown, they are finding a way to store this water. It's a lot of underground storage. It's a lot of underground storage and infiltration, as you might expect. It's a dense community, but they are finding that space and doing it. So in this scenario, we basically tested out what if over the next 50 years, every community did this. We made some assumptions about development and redevelopment. And basically what you're seeing is that if you're building that much storage into your landscape, not only are you mitigating the impact of climate change, you're better than you are today. You're improving that flooding a little bit. Another thing we tested is just 2 different approaches across the watershed. Either if you're doing a lot of stuff in a small amount of land, that's essentially what this one is. It's going to be a little better. And then in comparison, this one is doing at least something everywhere. So really ubiquitous action all across the geography, and you can see that's much better. So unfortunately, one of the messages here, in the Charles, there's no silver bullet. There's no one project. There's no one thing we can point to and say, oh, invest in that. That'll fix the flooding in the watershed. It really is that watershed approach. It's building storage into the landscape and improving conveyance where you can't build more storage. So that means we need to start taking action. That means we need to start building the storage into the landscape. So after kind of getting that message loud and clear from the watershed scale modeling, we realized, well, we can play a role in this. We can actually find some site-specific solutions. We can develop concept designs. We can work with communities to get additional designs funded and then even constructed. So a lot of our energy has now shifted away from that watershed scale, using that data that we found at the watershed scale into designing and implementing local projects. This is just one that's kind of hot off the presses. This is a pond in Sherburne, so kind of middle watershed for us. Another beautiful spot if you want to check out the middle and upper Charles. So what's happening right now, this pond drains into the town's stormwater system. So this water, relatively clean water, goes into the stormwater system. takes up capacity in that stormwater system that is supposed to be for stormwater, and is causing flooding backups. Right up here is the fire department, so it's on the same part of the stormwater system. This pond, when it gets a lot of water, just dumping into those pipes, backing up the pipes. They actually had flooding at their fire department because this part of the system has been so capacity limited. So what we're suggesting here, let's not have that water from a pond flow into the system, especially during a rain event. So what we can do, we can actually use this pond to store water. We can change that outlet, move it higher, or even better, make it a smart outlet so that during a rain event, it's actually closed. You're using the pond to safely store water. A pond is a good place for water because that's where water goes. So use that pond to store water, hold it in there safely during dry weather when you need to overflow, or before a rain event when you need to draw down that pond to make more room. That's when you let the water go into the system. So we're finding solutions like this all across the watershed. We have had one constructed so far that is in Newton, large storage and infiltration under an athletic field. An athletic field they were redoing anyway. Without this project, they would have just redone the athletic field. Now they have a large underground infiltration system there. This was in Julio's slides, but just to quickly also mention that there is regional collaboration going on the coastal side. This is a slide from the dual Charles and Mystic effort. A little different here where maybe there are more of a silver bullet type approach where if we look along the coast, maybe there are some interventions where we can invest in to actually protect a large amount of area behind it. So what we've learned so far, I've really touched on all of this, but regional collaboration is key. Again, in the funding conversations that are to come, some of the things we've been thinking about, can we use upstream land for storage and have some sort of financial exchange there because the downstream residents are the potential benefactors of that. Because everyone does want to develop, or I should say, have a financial incentive to develop, as Bob was saying. Broad and aggressive action, working with communities as we've shifted into this local scale approach. We've been going in and meeting with residents. Residents have awesome ideas. Some of the ideas for these projects that we've taken up came from residents and residents groups because they know their communities. And then finding efficiencies, working at the regional level really allows you to do that. Imagine if each town had done this on their own, just the money that it would have cost, the time it would have taken. So working at the regional scale allowed us to do that very efficiently. So take action is my #1 theme of the day. I think Bill started us all off with that. It is time to take action. We know what works and we can start doing it. In our case, strong stormwater regulations that account for flooding are one of the things that work. Working with partners to identify projects, and then exploring regional governance structures that might allow for some of that more easy financial investment where it's needed, regardless of exactly who's benefiting. With that, thank you for having me, and some more
Thank you very much. When I said we have excellent planning, the last 3 presentations should leave no doubt at all. Deep understanding of the problem. Water doesn't respect political boundaries. We all know that, right? It's going to go where it's going to go. There are natural features like watersheds that could be adapted on a regional basis to address flooding. And there is legislation pending now that was filed by the Charles River Watershed Association to address that by having the state divided up into regional watersheds, and the watersheds become special purpose entities to address flooding. I want to also acknowledge that not only are they sponsors, but we have here today the Mystic River Watershed Association and the Neponset River Watershed Association. The 3 main actors in this area, all doing the same kind and incredible work that Julie just went through. So the panel today has talked a lot about planning. And planning based on climate change and planning based on meteorological conditions, right? It's more storms, more rainfall, more sea level rise, but there's another storm, and it's here now. It's not, we don't have to wait for the next storm, for this storm. I call it the insurance storm, the affordability and availability of insurance. It is here in Massachusetts, in coastal areas all around the states, and not just on coastal areas, it's in Riverine areas as well. People seeing their insurance bills go up and losing insurance. And in the view of our changing federal government, this is a huge, huge issue. So we're fortunate today to kind of switch from the meteorological storm to looking at the insurance storm that's accelerating planning into action. And for that, we are graced by the Chief Executive Officer of InnSure, which is one of the most innovative, creative, and visionary organizations focused on the changes that are happening in insurance today. And with us today is the CEO, Charlie Sidoti. So, Charlie.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that intro. Certainly appreciate the panel. Just quickly, InnSure, we're a nonprofit. We're an innovation hub. We don't sell insurance. But we do work a lot with communities to integrate insurability planning into economic development planning, into resilience planning. And we also work with the industry to innovate around the needs of communities as opposed to just building products and bringing them to sell. And it's a challenging market, and I'm going to talk through and what everybody talks about is an insurance crisis. Bill kind of alluded to it. It's here today. Around 50% of all catastrophe losses are uninsured. Those are unfunded liabilities that land on either the people in the community, the businesses in the community, the municipality, the state, or the federal government in terms of disaster relief, which is receding. 50%, that's a big number. If you think about healthcare insurance, the protection gap in healthcare insurance when Massachusetts led the way on reforming healthcare was at 15%. And Obamacare came in and there's still challenges, but property casualty catastrophe insurance is significantly unfunded through insurance, and those costs are critical to plan. And what we heard from the earlier panel, Nayelli was talking about 100-year storms going to 10-year storms, and everybody on the panel was talking about large investments into resilience that are being made and need to be made. Those are both kind of in opposite directions, changing the total cost of risk that lands on either insurance or the unfunded piece. And a lot of our work is thinking about what makes up this insurance crisis. And we like to break it down because a lot of people say it's a risk crisis, climate change is changing risk, and there is this kind of race against time and kind of climate change that is both increasing costs because of the changes in catastrophe kind of frequency and severity. That is real. But that's not the whole picture. That's half the picture. There's also an insurance market that is monitoring this, looking at this, and they have the ability, insurance contracts, unlike mortgages, which are 15, 20, 30 years, or economic development planning, which is 50 to 100 years to, communities, they can move, and they're, we talked about managed retreat, but, they're largely in place. Insurance markets have one-year contracts. They can exit markets. They can change terms and conditions, which externalize risk that they don't understand. So there's really two crises. There's this risk challenge that you heard a lot about, which it's a race against time. We need to invest in adaptation. We need to bring the cost of risk down. But we also can't kind of outsource the insurance markets to the insurance industry, because they will externalize, and they run businesses, and they will design products. Capital comes out of large global capital centers like Munich, London, Switzerland, Bermuda, and they are not super in tune with what the Watershed's doing, what CZM is doing, what the town of Plymouth is doing, and what Salem is doing. And so they build models that are global models, and they don't understand the risk as much as you think they do, and they certainly don't understand it at a hyper-local level. And so there's insurance mispricing that is, what it's often doing is mispricing, especially the innovative investments in adaptation, which discourages investment in all the things that we've been talking about all morning. And so I want to talk, so I think everybody knows the risk piece. I mean, you guys probably know the risk piece better than we do. So I want to talk a little bit about where markets break, where markets fail, beyond just, you know, the adaptation didn't keep up with the risk. So we are kind of building out this model with support from CZM and some foundations and the federal government as well, which we should be making some announcements on soon. But we've built this kind of conceptual model that we're trying to put analytics around to say insurance markets fail in a number of places. And this works kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't close the protection gap, which is level 6, unless all level 5, the 5 levels below it, are actually met, the needs of it. And at the bottom level there's a technical insurability challenge that says, one, can you model the risk? So we do need better models. We need better flood models that are compound models that address both coastal and riverine flooding. And we need to also move away from this kind of you're in a flood zone or you're not in a flood zone kind of mentality, because that mentality causes people outside the flood zone not to buy insurance, not to put capital into the pool of capital that is funding the risk, when it's clearly wrong, because 50% of all flood losses right now are happening outside of designated flood zones. So you can't pool risk if half the people in the flood zone, and this was the problem with healthcare insurance. So we need to rethink, reimagine kind of how we think about especially flood, but other things as well, wildfire, wind, new perils like extreme heat. Do we have models? Things like social burden, insurance models generally model assets. And if you think about a daycare in a community that gets flooded maybe has $100,000 worth of damage. But if you actually calculated, you have models that calculated, 100 kids that can't go to daycare for a month, their parents that need to not go to work because they need to either watch their kids or somebody else that has to watch the kids. And then the employers that employed those parents who then are losing an employee for a period of time. If you had a model that calculates that, it's a very different loss. And it cascades through the community in different ways. So some of the things that we are trying to do at InnSure is build models that look at the modeling from the community perspective, from that unfunded liability. Who's uninsured? What are the consequences of that uninsured piece? And what are the benefits of bringing the risk down if you go in and actually intervene in the insurance market at the same time. So there's this lower level, this bottom level of technical insurability. Then the next level is availability of products. So does the insurance industry build products that cover the risk you're talking about? Extreme heat, there's some companies looking at it, but there aren't a lot of products that insure kind of the consequences of extreme heat. And there's a lot of different areas. We're working with the California Department of Insurance on things like how can you insure the urban forests, that get, damaged during a storm that cause all these cascading, both maintenance costs, we heard about maintenance costs, but also, things like, it affects extreme heat. So there's a lot of things that new products that could be developed. Beyond just having new products, there also needs to be sufficient capital to back the new products. So there is flood and wind and storm products from many, many insurance companies that are available on the Cape and Islands. But those insurance companies also want to limit their eggs in one basket. In the Cape and Islands, because there's a lot of expensive assets there, the aggregate value of everything is very large. And if all the companies are limiting their kind of eggs in one basket, there really isn't enough capacity. There isn't enough capital available to the market to close that protection gap. And what you're seeing is the non-renewal rate, because of increases in some of the modeling around wind and also some of the flood issues, is causing, many people don't know this, but Massachusetts, the Barnstable County, Cape and Islands, is, I think it's the 4th or 5th non-renewal area in the country. Right after places like Florida, Louisiana, California wildfire, it's the Cape and Islands. And we're working with the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce to think about, like, what does that mean for an area that 2/3 of the residents are second and third homeowners that could leave if, even absent a catastrophe, a disaster, the inavailability of insurance could potentially have economic impact to the community. When people start saying, well, I can't get insurance, it can affect the, insurance is the canary in the coal mine. Insurance supports the lending into communities, the banking industry. It supports the tax base. It supports the bond markets. So if insurance markets fail, and they are failing, 50% protection gap is a failure of the insurance markets or the risk financing. So we need to reimagine how we finance risk, how we bring insurance in, how we bring other mechanisms to finance the residual risk that is left after all the investments into adaptation. And we think that that is kind of part of the planning part that is missing. Just quickly, by a show of hands, how many people in this audience are involved in kind of architect, engineering, planning activities? Quite a few. How many are involved in insurance? No. Kind of, sort of, a couple. So that's a problem. Insurance, and we look at one of the core problems is that duration mismatch, that those strategic priorities are organized around time horizons that are very different between the insurance sector, a huge sector, architects and engineers, economic development, and economic development can be developers who are kind of building something but then handing it off to somebody else to operate, or people that are operating for long time horizons. The duration mismatch is part of the core kind of strategic foundational problems. But beyond the duration mismatch, each of those sectors, architects, engineers, kind of economic development, planning, and then and then kind of the insurance sector, they have different languages. They have kind of a status quo around kind of what they do, and they operate in their kind of bubbles. And when they look at these challenges, when you talk to people in the insurance industry, they're like, this is a risk issue. These people need to invest in adaptation and bring the risk down, and insurance markets will just automatically respond, which is not true because of all these things. And I'll go through a few more of them in a second. So one of the things that we think is really important is that, and we don't think it's gonna, and I have 20 years in the insurance industry. Captain McCabe left. I went to Maritime, and so I was super excited to hear about the Waterfront. But one of the things we need to do is bring the insurance industry into these conversations early, and bring them in a way where the people in the planning process, the people in the investment and adaptation are coming into the conversation knowledgeable a lot about these things, where the insurance market can break, what type of products you need, what type of risk reduction you have done in insurance terms, and then kind of dictate what you need for products. Insurance can be innovated at multiple different levels. We are building a simulator to help do this with communities, help bring information to the market, and help bring insurers with new products, new distribution, and even new capital stacks that can give the power back to communities to shape the insurance markets that they need to really kind of capture the value of the investments into resilience in the local insurance markets. I'll kind of wrap it up. Bill's kind of on a tight schedule here. But there's a QR code. We have a lot of articles on kind of Substack. Certainly, we have projects going on in Salem, Plymouth. We're working with the Cape. We're talking to a lot of other communities that people are interested in kind of seeing a demo of our tools, kind of hearing how we work. We're happy to jump on a call or come out and meet you.
Thank you. Terrific. So we're going to get into a question and answer opportunity here, but I do want to note one thing. What Joe and I do is we're independent strategic advisors on flood protection. And we try to bring creative ideas that have come from many of you. We've begun a discussion with the Insurance Commissioner of Massachusetts. And our point is that insurance, as Charlie was saying, is usually about risk transfer. Well, why can't insurance invest in risk reduction? If insurance was paying for the coastal resiliency and riverine resiliency features that were being built to reduce risk, maybe they could get an extended benefit. People would be paying premiums not because they were going to be damaged, but because they were protected. So there are a lot of innovative and creative ways to approach this, and you've seen that creativity and innovative approach in the panel today. So we're open to any questions from the audience. Yes. Yes, you. Let me give you a...
Okay, I can talk really loud.
That's all right. There we
All
go.
right, thank you,
Cindy.
Bill.
Yeah.
So I have a ton of questions, but I'll loop into the insurance question because 3 of my questions are around that. And I'll admit that I used to work for AIG in IT risk management, both in New Jersey. Hello, Cindy, I was there, and here in Boston. So there's a few things that I just want to mention and ask, and I hope I can read my handwriting. The first thing is I guess, is the theme of regulation. I feel really strongly that we have to recognize what we've got on the books. I don't know how we best do that because sometimes just doing more regulation conflicts or ignores what we've already got in place, and enforcement is part of implementation and execution. So that's one concern. How do we do that? How do we get our arms around both state and city regs as well as Fed? It has a big impact even here. I got my flood insurance notice this year, and it said in big red letters, oh, by the way, Massachusetts won't support this insurer, who I've had for many years, by the way, because if they default, we're not handling it. Now, I don't have to have flood insurance, but I do have flood insurance. And when you started to talk about a renewal drop, that's kind of a big issue. I think the other thing that I wanted to ask about the insurance is, you know, how do we support a higher level of people getting insured and refunding things by taking the different municipalities and state level, maybe looking at some of the modeling that you're doing so that people understand that flood insurance isn't just my half of the street, which, by the way, my half of the street is flood insured if you've got a mortgage, otherwise you can buy out. And the other half of the street is saying, oh God, I hope they don't issue a new map because then I'm gonna have to pay a lot of money. My daughter lives in New Jersey, right on the water. Half of the houses got wiped out in Sandy and half of them are in stilts. The other half are just, I don't know what they're doing, praying? I don't know. It's a big question, and I'm just wondering how can we use the regulatory environment to collaborate better?
Good question.
I'll take a shot. It is a very big question. It is the core of kind of our whole body of work. And similar to the Watershed conversation, there is no silver bullet. There's a lot of little things, and it needs to happen on the regulatory side, and part of that is Department of Insurance, but even beyond, like you can't, like you were saying, you can't just regulate everything and think it's gonna work. There needs to be, we think one of the things, the core mandate of departments of insurance everywhere is, you know, don't gouge customers, but keep the community, keep the insurance industry solvent so that they have enough money to pay claims. You can do both of those things without closing the protection gap. So we think there needs to be like a third focus on how, and maybe it's not the Department of Insurance, it's probably the whole of government, like how do you close protection gaps? That needs to be a core kind of metric. But also there's things that can be innovated at a local level. How can you do maybe group purchase of insurance? How can you bring data around the adaptation that you're doing and work with the industry to say, I need a project, I need a new product. We are working with a homeowners association that does manufactured homes, mobile homes, where there is a lack of product in Massachusetts. And we are working with an insurance company and trying to get others to come on board to say, we need some very specific products. It's kind of like an orphan drug challenge, but manufactured homes are a large percentage of affordable homes in Massachusetts. So if we can solve this little problem, it has outsized effects. So there's a lot of different tools to close protection gaps, and none of them are super easy.
Thank you very much, Sean. Other questions? Oh, did you want to talk? Oh, no. Anyone, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much. That was great. Matt Levy, U.S. Government Accountability Office. What I wanted to ask about was adaptation at the homeowner or building level. One thing I heard people mention a little bit was relocation, voluntary relocation, or without displacement. And that's one way of adapting. But I was also curious if people could speak to other ways of helping communities and individual homeowners adapt and stay in place.
Thank you very much. Julia, do you want to address that? And then Nayelli and Julia.
Yeah, I can talk about one program that the City of Boston is working on now in the Port Norfolk area of Dorchester. So it's a pilot, pretty small, but we recognize that there were about 40 homes that are outside the line of district scale protection, and we are not in the business of leaving anyone behind. So even though the cost benefit analysis didn't make sense, partly for structural reasons to move the line of district scale protection, we still wanted to make sure that we had an answer for those residents, and that's a condition that repeats in a couple of other places around the city as well. So we, using ARPA funds, actually, created a program that's being run by my colleagues at the DPA. Oh, there's one of my slides from earlier. To do a series of building level audits for residential properties in Port Norfolk. So residents can sign up to have an external from the city, like an independent auditor, because we understand that there's some sensitivities about in the course of trying to identify how your home might be vulnerable to flood risk, potentially an audit revealing some other things that are not up to code potentially. We didn't want to create hesitancy or tension there for residents, so it's an outside auditor that can come to residents' homes, create a sort of an action plan for them for the things that they could do to make their homes more resilient. Ultimately, we didn't have the funding to fund those retrofits, but we're hoping to pursue that. And potentially to scale the audit program to other neighborhoods depending on how this first phase goes. So that's one example of a program that we're trying out to address exactly what you're talking about, how to help residents stay in place.
I'll offer a few other thoughts. We also are having conversations with neighborhoods about early warning, about better awareness of growing flood risks, especially those king tide events that can flood out neighborhoods and cars. And to think about on these low threshold events, if we can have some collective action in terms of moving vehicles, doing some flood proofing of your house, whether it's a deployable that you put over a basement window. Like, let's also talk about these low level actions that communities and residents can take. I mean, we need to be working at the full spectrum of approaches here, not just the major events that result in catastrophic loss.
Thank you. Nayelli, I'm sorry we missed your visuals.
That's okay.
But we now have the visuals up
Yeah.
there, so you can see what would have been there if Nayelli didn't visualize with her narrative as accurately as she did. Sorry about the technical thing, but at least they'll see the plans up there. Other questions? Yes. Oops.
This is a question for Nayelli. You mentioned you're talking about the projects that are ongoing and completed, and it's exciting, but you also said, look, we started with parks because that's what the city controls. I'm interested in the next steps and how much on a percentage basis. I think you said parks is a very small percentage of the land area that we have to address. Can you speak a little bit about what will be progressively the next things that you go after?
Sure. So this is a well-timed slide here. When we're talking with the working with the Army Corps, so they'll be our partner in helping to identify the areas where we need more capital projects along our coastline. Help move those projects to preliminary design. Right now, we're just in the phase of identifying what the cost of inaction would be and some like rough order of magnitude project costs for what the capital projects will be needed to address the flood risk along the coast. Throughout that process, we've been coordinating with our state partners, notably at Massport, at the MBTA, and at MassDOT, because a lot of the property along the state or along the coastline is controlled by the state. Some are DCR parks, and we have a template for how we have designed and planned our parks that hopefully we can work with DCR on. But when you're protecting transit infrastructure and some of the other stakeholders that are along the waterfront, like Massport, they have these different needs for shipping and water transportation. It's a very different set of needs. So to answer your question about where we're looking next, I think we're trying to identify both the places where we have need, but also where we can align with the state's capital planning on all of these different areas that are either managed and owned by the T or Massport, or MassDOT for where their capital project pipeline aligns with what we're identifying is needed in the Army Corps project pipeline, so that we can begin with projects. An example of which is Orient Heights in East Boston, where the TOs identified it as an area of priority from their resilience roadmap. The Army Corps identified it as a potential early action project in their plan. It was also identified in the East Boston neighborhood plans. So that's an area of commonality where even though we don't own the property, it's identified across all the stakeholders as a priority, and so we can move that forward. So that's I think our next tranche of projects is areas of identified priority and potential investment. The hardest tranche of projects will be areas that are not identified as priority by one stakeholder, but potentially identified as priority by the city, and that's where we're hoping to build those governance structures to be able to have those conversations. I probably have one more question that I have to get back to someone.
Bill, we got
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning, thank you. Two questions. The first question is that while you're building stakeholder relationships, have you thought about engaging more directly with neighborhoods and organizations to get them to be a part of resilience and do mitigation? And a number of activities are taking place. I know the city of Boston has an emergency group now that is involved in cleaning drains and making the streets clean so that, for mitigate flooding to minimize impacts in neighborhoods, especially in low-lying areas like Rosendale and parts of Roxbury and things like that. They're getting people involved in cleaning the drainways and things of that nature. The other question would be on insurance. Have you thought about going back to NFIP and getting them to work more through FEMA? Because there is mitigation money anytime the disaster has been declared. There's resources available, and I'm not sure if FEMA is responding to this, but there should be some more support and help in terms of educating and getting people aware of what the impacts might be in terms of their planning and how they're building.
Thank you, Boris.
We are definitely interested in and engaged, I think, in every neighborhood with the resilience efforts that are happening on the ground among community groups. The Pamper Your Drain, I think, program that you're maybe talking about, that is, I think, something that we are involved in at the city, but also have to give a lot of credit to BWSC. They're a huge stakeholder in that space as well, and so where it comes to our city catch basins and cleanouts, that's another big part of the puzzle, and they do a lot of work there and have a lot of community outreach as well. So I think we're getting at that both from the city and BWSC side. In terms of the stormwater management and community level programs, in terms of the coastal resilience, like I mentioned, all of those neighborhood plans were done with incredible community engagement, and we have so much more left to go when we move those plans from kind of the concept that was identified across our neighborhood and ClimateReady Boston plans to the final designs that will be implemented over the next decade. So yeah, community engagement is, we lead with that. It's foundational to everything that we're doing.
One more question over here.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Lee, and I'm here with a group crew, Community Respond to Extreme Weather, along with my coworker Lexi. And I have I guess first is a comment addressing the elephant in the room around the grid infrastructure department that's been dismantled in Boston. So I just want to name that, so while we're here thinking about the importance of investing and engaging communities, at the same time you have a department that was dismantled, and at least from our perspective and the organizations we work with, done so in ways that were highly non-transparent, and it's really not clear about that process, and then all the staff and other people, all the projects that have been put on immediate permanent hiatus. So I just wanted to name that. So if you're welcome to comment on it, but I just want to name that's happening simultaneously, and that's one potential cultural issue that we need to just name. And then I guess it's two questions that are intertwined, and they're related to, I guess, creative solutions, how we're thinking beyond some of the typical ways that we are looking to for funding and for models for what we can do on the ground, actionable projects. So one is just around connections to the international community. I know I was kind of saying to my coworker here, I was kind of joking, there was around World War II, we're not in World War II anymore. We're also in a moment now where we're trending in a dangerous direction. And so I'm just thinking about if we can't necessarily be looking to the federal level for support, who could we be looking to as international friends, like building friendships with others in the international community for funding, support, and for, again, models for actionable projects. Another lens adding as well is thinking about the non-human elements here. So, you know, I think a lot about the Endangered Species Act. So can we be utilizing other species as means for also, you know, accessing funding? I also think of that as a great idea because it helps us move out of just sort of the human-centric way of addressing climate issues. Yeah, so I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Great question. Who wants to handle it?
I'll just say that I appreciate you being here and appreciate the comments. You know, acknowledged the Office of Green Infrastructure was not part of our team, but obviously a close partner. And I think the work continues, and advocates like everybody in this room, I have confidence are going to keep us on the right course ultimately. Yeah, I would just say, you know, please keep up your advocacy because not only for green infrastructure, but for all of this work. To your point, you know, we have our focus, and it's the advocates and community members who I think we like to hold us responsible for broadening that and course correcting where we maybe over focus on some areas of the agenda, potentially at the expense of others. In terms of like coalition building, that's one of the excellent things about the Resilient Coasts plan is that it did have this like broader coalitional lens. International coalitions, not something that's explored in Resilience Coast explicitly, but an interesting, I would say, provocation.
We do have a good example with the Gulf of Maine Council. The governors and Eastern Canadian premiers have gotten together to say that we do share a boundary and large Gulf of Maine ecosystem that we do need to protect in terms of all of the natural resources that you highlight. And there's been amazing work there in terms of tapping federal resources over the years in order to advance our understanding of the large system and how we can really promote adaptation of working waterfronts, water quality. So there are examples where we do have those international partnerships.
Well, I want a big round of applause for this incredible panel. We're going to take a short 10-minute break, assembling back here at 5 past, so get refreshments or whatever, and then we're going to address the missing links. You know, where's the money coming from? Who's going to make the decisions, and who's going to get protected? So please,
I sure can. Yes. Where would you guys like to?
I don't know. Maybe a photo.
Should we stand in front of your phone? I need to run.
Charlie, get up here.
We'll put your presentation up.
Yeah.
Do you need some food or something?
Yeah.
Charlie. We need you for a picture.
Oh, no, we'll see you tomorrow.
Good to see you. Really good.
Durand.
Kicking off, we've got a couple that are coming up here shortly. Joel. Thank you guys for taking the break and staying. This crowd has stayed, which is really important. A lot of the people that spoke, took time, which they really can do, to come here and present, and they were spectacular. So we're going to try to address now the missing links. You've heard about the plans. They're world-class. Massachusetts is leading the world and the country in the planning capacity. And now you're going to hear about the missing links between planning and the transition to action. And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where we have to understand the complexities of what we're facing. Not just complexities from interdisciplinary complexity, but the political complexities. One of the images that you just saw was the Watershed Association for one watershed. And I think it was, 38 communities in that one watershed. So we have 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. I know because I was running for lieutenant governor, I went to every one of them. They're all around, and they have not really cooperated since the American Revolution. And they didn't do all that well back then. But we have a tradition of town government and city government calling the shots. And it just doesn't reflect the kind of challenges that we're facing now. So as we proceed here, I want you to be thinking about where we go with this. At the end of this, we'll have a question and answer period for the panel, and then we'll have a situation where we ask you to take the next step. And we'll talk about that at that time. Chris had family issues, and he had Chris Mancini. By the way, Save the Harbor has been an amazing partner in putting this all together. We have some board members like Michael Leone here, and they have a fantastic organization. And he couldn't finish the final closing, so I'll do that as well. But let's start now. I guess I'm next up, Joel. Right.
Yep, you're ready to go.
Thank you. So, where do we start? I believe the first is governance. When I filed the lawsuit to clean up Boston Harbor, I wasn't supporting or advocating for tertiary treatment or deep ocean outfall. I wanted to take apart an agency, the MDC, and create a new agency which turned out to be the MWRA. The whole purpose of the suit was to create the institutional governance to address the horrendous problem of pollution in Boston Harbor, and which was affecting Massachusetts Bay as well. And so if we take the first step, we have to think about who's going to own this project, who's going to make these decisions about, let me get this right, advancing to the right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're going to have a project that is effective and cost-effective, it depends on the governance organizational structure. Is the structure of the owner-operator. That's the first decision we have to make. Who owns it, who funds it, who is accountable for it, and that will determine whether the plan ever gets built, whether, as Nayelli pointed out, it's not just building these, it's maintaining them. And you'll hear more about that from Joel when he talks about the connection between governance and finance. But they have to be maintained. And how do you fund a project today? We're not talking about the smaller projects, the parks, the getting private developers to put up a berm. We're talking about the mega projects that it's going to require to address the problem of coastal and riverine flooding. Governance can come in many forms. You can have an existing government entity that becomes the owner-operator. This is most often in a municipality that, we talked earlier about how flooding doesn't respect political boundaries. But if you're the city and you're trying to address a vulnerability within the city, you are in control. You could choose to be the owner-operator and be the one that controls the project, owns it, operates it, maintains it, and funds it. But there are some issues with that. It's easier to deliver, but not so easy maybe to fund a mega project. You heard Nayelli talk about their problems in matching funds and getting additional funds. You can have a joint powers agreement. What is that? Okay, well, if you're going to look over your shoulder, you'll see Fort Point Channel there. It's within the city of Boston, right? But again, as Nayelli mentioned, they don't control all that land. Some is private, some is public, some is owned by other state agencies. You have in Wedette Circle a huge, I think it's $1 billion project that's being planned for Wedette Circle. That's a DOT, MBTA, project. The MWRA has facilities here as well. So if you're going to do a joint powers agreement, you've got to get all the players to the table. And you've got to figure out who's the lead and who votes and how they vote. Even if you don't have a special purpose entity, you've got to have those mechanisms in place. It's not as simple as it might seem. Right now, there are huge controversies going on in the city between agencies who owe each other money and have not paid. Significant money. They refuse to pay. So if you put together a group of disparate state, municipal entities, and maybe private sector landowners, how do you relate? Who makes the decision there? And so the third is a special purpose entity. The purpose is to have one authority that right from the very beginning designs, builds, owns, operates, maintains, and independently funds the project. One of the problems is not only getting everybody to kick in when you have a joint powers arrangement, but finding the money if it's just a city project. How do you face bonding caps? Right now, we're trying to find funds for affordable housing, for healthcare, for education, transportation, real needs requiring large investments. And if you're going to spread those out over a multi-generational structure, you need bonding. But as many of you know, you get a bond issued by the city or the state or an independent agency. And if you aren't within the bonding capacity of your entity, if you exceed what the bonding agencies see as your safe bonding capacity, they begin to lower your bonding rate. It goes from A+ to A or even below that. And what does that mean? You're paying more for money. So it's very rare that any entity wants to exceed its bonding capacity. Therefore, if you're doing a mega project, a special purpose entity that has bonding authority, like the MWRA, is the way to proceed. So, using the authority that exists, it can be the fastest start. You have a existing organizational capacity that makes it, an agency that can take a running start. They have the administrative capacity, and maybe they have experience building things. The cons are that existing government entities, again, have the bonding issue. They also have a geographic limitation. Often your problem is bigger than the existing entity. Now, those of you that have known me for a while and have followed my op-eds, the last op-ed I wrote for the Globe was saying we needed an MWRA type agency to take over flood protection in the metropolitan area. I was wrong. I now believe I am wrong. We don't need an MWRA type agency to do that. We need the MWRA. And I have long advocated a flood division added to the water division and the sewage division of the MWRA. They know how to build things. They know how water works. They have the very high level capacity to manage large infrastructure projects. Now, if you did that, you'd set up a separate division for flood. People could opt in or opt out of that division. The ratepayers for water and sewer would not be paying for flood protection at all unless they were getting flood protection and wanted to opt into the system. But you have riverine situations. You have flooding downstream and not upstream. But the upstream people are sending the water your way. What do you do there? Well, if they don't want to join the flood protection division, there is a fee that is paid by all contributors, mandatory to this new authority, while the regulatory aspects and the governance of it is within the authority. I jumped a little ahead. I'm a little passionate about that. So let's go back to the Joint Powers Agreement. You see this on the slide here. And this is just Fort Point Channel. This ain't the Boston waterfront in its entirety. It's just one little section of it, right? It's going to be very expensive to build the Fort Point Channel project. But then again, what is the seaport worth to the city of Boston? It's 15% of the tax base, right? What is Dorchester worth? What is the Widette terminal going to be worth if it's not protected by a flood protection system? So you have to figure out in a joint powers agreement who is really in charge here. And if everyone is in charge, Katie, bar the door. Everybody's got their separate interests, their own political constituency, their own people in the legislature. They can, ask for a special favor here or there, and it becomes really difficult. You have to have an owner-operator that's worked out contractual agreements with these other agencies and has the force to collect from them so they don't have to sue them in court to get paid for the services they're providing them. This is complicated, but it's doable. So special purpose entities. Special purpose entities, the whole state could have a special purpose entity. The region, Watershed could have, or the Boston Harbor metropolitan area could have a regional entity. You could have a special purpose entity. You could have a special purpose entity purpose entity just for the city of Boston. That was mentioned today. You could have a project-based special purpose entity. Let's say you want to start just doing a single project. Well, you could create a special purpose entity that had as owner-operator the ability to design, build, own, operate, maintain, and independently fund that project. And the Mass Turnpike is an example of that. I just learned the other day that the Mass Turnpike Authority built 122 miles of that turnpike in less than 2 years. Try doing that today. But that was built on just around one single project. And the revenue streams from that project was so incredible that it spit out hundreds of millions of dollars that went to help constituencies around the turnpike. So those are various means of doing these agencies. What would a state entity look like? Well, a state entity could actually just be the funding, right? There's a funding source. It really isn't an entity per se. It is, but it's a revolving fund. Think, mass development. Think other agencies that are put together to kind of fund projects. And this could be one that's focused solely on flooding. It could be focused on flooding and coastal resiliency, both riverine and coastal. And it could provide low-interest loans. But that doesn't really address the governance issue. You're still dealing with 351 cities and towns right out there. Now there was a lot of this is experimentation. You gotta try things, see what works, what doesn't work. So we have MVP 1 that got everybody on the coast, almost everybody in the state doing a vulnerability analysis, right? Then we have MVP 2. Let's move into design. Let's start thinking about what these solutions would be to this issue. And they allowed that competition to go on a regional basis. So one town would get together with other towns and apply for grants to move a resiliency project forward, or to define what that regional resiliency project would actually look like. And what happened in that? Well, you get the town of Newton, or the city of Newton together, and they submit on MVP 2 a plan to work with all the other communities around them, 6 or 7 communities, because they have the managerial capacity to apply for and to manage a grant. And the others, their planning departments, their administrative people don't have that capacity. But what happens with that? Who do you think calls the shots? Who becomes the owner-operator of all that? Newton, right? So that has been an issue where you have those regional associations. So again, you can have the funding coming from the state level, but if you don't have governance structures below the state level receiving the funds, you are not going to develop effective, efficient projects, and you're probably not going to get off the ground. Now, if we're talking about regional special purpose entities, I'm going to focus on the MWRA. The MWRA is an enormous success story. And why? Because its governance structure and organizational structure have really withstood the test of time. They have raised rates significantly. I think when I filed the lawsuit to clean up Boston Harbor, the average rate was like $179 per household for water and sewer services. When I left the Senate, it was like $1,200 or $1,300, and it's much higher today. Why have people agreed to pay more for water and sewer services? Why? Because when that governance structure was put together, there was a very careful balancing of interests, such that people today, they may disagree with MWRA policies, and people in this room, I know, certainly do, but at the same time, the MWRA was respected as a cost-efficient, cost-effective, fair, and equitable governance entity. Its board has 3 appointees from Boston, 3 appointees from the governor, 3 appointees from the advisory board, the MWR advisory board, which in and itself is made up with representatives of every MWA constituency. I think 61 today. They're all represented at that. They all have input. And that advisory board reviews the budget, can have hearings on the budget, and enters the whole discussion of how is ratepayer money going to be paid out, how is it going to be used, and try to keep that on it. Then you have a representative from Quincy, because that's where one of the facilities is, and they get the community impacts of having that facility there, and one from Witham, which also has the impacts. A fair structure, 11 directors appointed by the interests here, the main stakeholders, and an advisory board representing every community. Under those conditions, you can have one entity that owns, operates, designs, builds, maintains, and independently funds. They have independent bonding authority. They can spread the cost of these facilities out 50 years. 3 generations end up paying for it because multiple generations are going to get the benefit of it. So special purpose entities have a special place, I think, in approaching the issue of governance structure and how this is set up. On a municipal scale, these can work, but I'll tell you, they aren't happening, really. Even the city of Boston, as you heard today, is thinking of it and looking at it. But again, if you do it on a municipal scale, it's the municipality's bonding authority that is being addressed. It doesn't have independent, and if you set it up as a special purpose entity where there is independent bonding authority, you are not necessarily reaching the threat, which is bigger than the city of Boston. The impacts of climate change are bigger than Boston, and yet affecting Boston. I mean, people can build a wall around Boston, but how do people get here to work? You know, how do people interact with the watershed and the marine working waterfront? So municipal special purpose entities can work probably best on a pilot project that's within that geographic area and addressing a regional or maybe sub-regional impact of climate change that is within the municipality. That may well work. So this is, I'll end by saying this. We don't know what we don't know. We're in a new area where we're trying to address issues that no one has addressed in our country before. We could lose 7.5% of our land mass before this is over. And the city of Boston, an existential threat. City of New York, the port cities. Now there are those that say, well, you just moved the city, right? Didn't work that well in Brazil when they tried to move their capital, and now in Indonesia when they're moving theirs. And why give up 400 years of blood, sweat, tears, and the tapestry of the greatest economic, cultural, and educational centers in the world? We could save them for 150 years maybe and work it out. So next up is to talk about pilot projects. Thank you. I will step down in my presentation and recognize the next presentation. My co-leader in our Independent Strategic Advisory Flood Protection Group at ESI is Joel Paulsen. Before we started working together, those of you who have been going to these conferences have seen Joel there quite a bit. I sometimes would bring up somebody that was presenting with an MIT background, as we had today, or you know, a Harvard background, business background. And then I'd introduce Joel and say, I want you to learn about the best managed mega project in the country. And I'd say he's from Fargo, North Dakota. And Joel is in a unique position. Joel is the guy now in this field nationally, and one of the experts internationally, because he did a mega project that you'll learn about today, but it is exactly what we need now with all the cutbacks in the federal government. The Army Corps is responsible for 100,000 miles of berms. They're supposed to spend 7% of their income on maintaining those. They spend about 1.5%. They have over $125 billion of authorized projects and $5 billion a year to hand out. So with the cutbacks, with changes of the Corps, we need the kind of innovation and creativity that occurred in Fargo, North Dakota. We need to figure out how to do these projects creatively, innovatively, effectively, efficiently, and find the political will to do them. So with that, my friend, colleague, and one of the people I admire most in this field, Joel Paulsen.
Thank you, Bill. As you guys know, Bill likes to embellish things, so I'll not ratchet it down a little bit. I'm just a farm kid from rural Minnesota that got thrown into this flood protection world and was lucky enough to be a part of and lead one of the most innovative flood protection projects in the country. And I'll just talk a little bit about Fargo just for a second because it is unique and it's something that you all should look up if you're thinking about moving into mega project flood protection. The Fargo project was authorized by Congress through the 2014 WRDA bill, and it allowed the Corps of Engineers to engage in alternative delivery. Prior to that, it was traditional Corps delivery. 65% federal costs, 35% local match, and the Corps does all the design, they do all the permitting, they do all the construction administration, and they propose projects that are in the best interest of the federal government, not necessarily the local government or even the state government. That way of delivering projects is over. And the Corps has even come out this year and they said it's over. We need to embrace the non-federal sponsor, we need to embrace the local groups, we need to give them the tools and allow the Corps of Engineers to engage with those tools in a different way of approaching projects. And a lot of that is based off of the Fargo project. So what made it so unique? We paid 70% local share and 30% federal share on that project. We put in mechanisms in our project partnership agreement with the Corps of Engineers that allowed federal funds to move to the non-federal space and be used by the non-federal sponsor for aspects of the project that were in the best interest of the non-federal sponsor, not necessarily the federal government. And what we did is we showed that we can help the Corps complete projects on time and on budget if they're working hand in hand with us in our financing arrangement. So we use a public-private partnership for the non-federal portion of the project, which means a private developer came in, they designed, they constructed, they're maintaining and operating a portion of our project for the next 30 years, and we worked out a long-term financial agreement that allowed them to access private capital markets on their behalf and extenuate the debt service out, so it reduced the cost and it reduced the risk, more importantly, of the non-federal sponsor, Fargo diversion, and put all that risk onto a private developer that was willing to take that risk for profit. Very innovative contracting technique. It's been done here in Boston, right, for different types of projects. It's not new to the industry, but it is new to flood protection. The other thing that was extremely innovative was that we were able to partition the risk of the project out so that private market would take the passive elements of the project and the Corps of Engineers would take the risky elements, the high hazard dam components, the operational functional gates of the project. Those all stayed within the federal purview and were designed and constructed using design bid build. And we partnered those two together, and because it was a pilot project, Congress funded it 100% for the federal side. And so the Corps of Engineers didn't have any start or stop. They had all the resources they needed. And they actually are completing their portion prior to the non-federal sponsor completing ours, but the project is still on schedule and on budget. So with all that said, now I just ate into my PowerPoint here about why it's so important to think differently nowadays about where we're at. And Bill hit it on the head. The federal delivery, I remember the colonel of the Corps of Engineers would come to Fargo quite often because he liked to come there and see a Corps of Engineers projects that was actually on budget. because the majority of them are not. And the reason they're not isn't because the Corps doesn't know how to deliver projects. They absolutely know how to deliver projects, and they deliver some of the best engineered projects in the world because they've been doing it for over 100 years and they know what they're doing. The problem is Congress and the appropriation of federal funds. And those are iffy. The Corps may or may not get their projects funded. Here are some staggering statistics. So right now, there's $130 billion of backlog at the Corps of Engineers of authorized projects. Those are projects the Corps has told Congress these are valid federal projects and they need to be funded. And as Bill mentioned, $5 billion, well, it varies. Every other year when they do the Corps' budget, they may or may not get 5, they may get 12, it all depends. But that's $12 billion overall for all of their authorized projects across the board. So the days of waiting for the federal government to come and put a pile of cash on your table and say, we're gonna do this project are over, and everybody knows it. The way forward is for the non-federal sponsor, maybe a special purpose entity like Bill had mentioned. In our case, we developed a joint powers agreement and we called it the Metro Flood Diversion Authority, and it had 7 different political subdivision members, and they were the governing board. They were able to accept funds, they were able to take out debt, and they were able to operate outside of any one political subdivision, and that is what is necessary for regional flood protection projects. That is the direction you need to go. And so now we start talking about, well, where's the funding going to come from, right? We're just the city of Boston. We're not the state of Massachusetts. We're not the federal government. How are we going to create revenue? We don't want to tax people. And Bill said something at the start of this conversation today. When he was talking about Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, and the cleanup of Boston Harbor. Do you want flood protection or don't you? Because FEMA says, and I believe it, and I believe the numbers are different now, that every dollar spent on flood protection saves $7 of post-disaster cleanup costs. And that number's changed over the years. It used to be $5. Now recently it was $7. I think that's been 3 or 4 years now. I bet it's even higher than that. So I wish I could get that investment return on my portfolio. Every dollar I put in, I get $7 back. These projects are cost effective. They're valuable and they need to be done. And what I learned on our project in Fargo was, and we kind of missed the boat on this, every flood protection project will increase land values significantly. Because you're taking the risk away. As Charlie mentioned, you're taking the risk away. The flood insurance premiums drop, the value of the properties rise. And the idea then is every flood protection project could create revenue sources internally just by doing the project. And one example would be a TIF district or a pseudo-TIF district, where you're taking the cost increase of the property and you're sending that extra tax dollars that comes based off of the price increase, and you're funneling that back in to retire long-term debt that was created for the flood protection project. The residents aren't paying anymore for taxes. They're getting a higher value on their property and they're being taxed at the same rate as everybody else. But instead of those dollars going back into the city's general fund budget and being used for whatever, they're being put back where they should be. And that's the infrastructure that created that value in the first place. And that's something I think everybody can get on board with. And that right there, we call it ring fencing in the industry. If you ring fence that revenue source, now with a special purpose entity, you can take that to the capital bond markets and you can start bonding and going into the long-term debt area. Not only that, but the federal government has wonderful long-term debt programs. EPA has WIFIA, the Corps has a similar WIFIA type program where you can borrow money at significant reduction to the bond market current rates. On the diversion project in Fargo, we got a 40-year loan at $470 million for 2.01%. Almost free money, basically. And so you can structure these things, and it was all through the special purpose entity. But just looking at these numbers, the Corps has to be a partner. that's a requirement. I mean, they're gonna be involved in permitting at the very minimal. But we need to start thinking about funding these projects and setting them up as a financing package that we can sell to the voters, we can sell to the politicians. And any grant money that comes from the state or the federal government, that just buys down the cost of the program. But the program should be self-sufficient without those grant dollars coming in. And that's the concept that really these grants were originally set up for in the first place. They were never set up at the federal level to say, you can only do the project if you get this grant money. The grant money was supposed to buy down local costs. It was supposed to fill gaps where necessary in communities that couldn't raise the revenue for various reasons. But we're in a community that has massive wealth, massive property wealth. There's ways to tap into that, equitably funnel that into the right infrastructure and create these projects and move them forward in a quick basis. Bill, tell me how I'm doing on time, because I tend to
We're going to probably not go into the question and answer period. We'll stay a little later. Both these speakers will speak for 20 minutes. You've got another 5.
Okay, so I'll
We took a long break.
I'll kind of wind down here a little bit. But these are concepts that we learned on the Fargo project that need to be in place in order to be successful. And one thing I wanted to stress is that on our project in particular, hindsight's always 20/20, right? And so when I look back at the decisions we made from the initial concept through a majority of construction, in which I was the executive director and I was involved in every single one of those decision-making processes, so I'll kick myself in the butt for some of those, and we did some of them very wrong. When I look back, if we would have done everything right, our $3.2 billion project would have been a $1 billion project. Okay, and that was a fast-track project with 100% congressional support. It was a pilot project. It was supported by the local government. It was supported by 2 states, Minnesota and North Dakota, and it was supported by the federal government. And we got basically all the resources necessary to do it. And we still made mistakes. So the way you set these entities up and the way you approach these projects have significant risk reduction and significant dollars tied to it. And if you make mistakes, you make mistakes, and you learn along the way. But not setting these things up properly and just waiting and waiting and waiting has a cost to it. And Stefani will talk about that, about not doing anything. We could have got our project done probably 10 years earlier had we done all the right things for $1 billion. Instead, it took us 3.2. We still got it done on schedule, but we learned a lot along the way. And the idea is, how can we take what we learned and bring it to communities like Boston, New York, Miami, San Francisco, Galveston, Houston, and how can we make sure that they don't make some of the mistakes we made? I think that's extremely important and could save these projects billions, I mean billions of dollars. So I'll just kind of quickly go through this, but so you can take some pictures, and maybe we can make these PowerPoints available, Bill, for everybody. But I mean, there's certain processes to go through here, and here I'm talking about the different capital stacking that we did on the Fargo project. We took advantage of every single one of those items on there to the maximum extent possible. But at the end of the day, any grants that came into our program were just buying down the program, and what I liked about it was that when the grant dollars came in, the politicians took credit for it, and it was a success, right? The project would have been financeable, with the way we had set it up, but every time we got a new grant, the politicians that were supporting the project got to pat themselves on the back, get in the news, create all this wonderful media around the project and how they were saving costs and everything else. That's a very different situation than setting your project up to require those grants to come through. Because when they don't come through, the political risk goes on the politicians, and people start saying, well, what are these guys doing? They're not getting us the money. They said they were going to get us the money. It didn't come through. Projects aren't moving forward. Here's, I'm going to skip past that one, but it'll be in there. I want to get to, let's see. I want to get to these models here, because that was kind of the point of what I was supposed to be talking about when I got a little off track. But, so these are the general setups for projects and how you deliver projects. And everybody's familiar with design bid build. Not so familiar probably with progressive design build. That's when you actually engage a contractor during the start of the preliminary planning of the project. And these are really kind of gaining steam within the industry and marketplace with engineering and contracting firms that are looking at large projects. They want to get involved at the ground level. It can save a lot of costs and create a lot of efficiencies between the public agencies and the contractor and engineer if they're working together from the start. The second is design build. That's more of a fast track type project where you give an engineer and a contractor who have partnered together a contract to design and build the project, but not necessarily operate and maintain. And the last one is the P3 approach that we used on the Fargo diversion project, coupled with design bid build on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers side. And the thing that's really nice about a design build, finance, operate, maintain P3 is that you're transferring all of that risk from the public ledger to the private ledger. And the public entity is just ensuring that the private entity is doing what they said they were going to do, meeting the metrics, designing to the specifications that were required, but it's all performance-based. And so what you're demanding is performance and to keep that infrastructure at a certain level of maintenance and make that a requirement of a long-term contract. P3's been used for toll roads, rail projects, airport terminals. The key here is that you need to find a local revenue source, ring fence it so it is dedicated to a P3 contract, and you can create those to have a lasting impact and have all of the maintenance priced in at the start of the contract. A lot of times these big mega projects will just be a capital expenditure. We just built this $3 billion infrastructure, but then the maintenance ends up eating away at the project cost long term. If you can wrap that into a long-term 30-year agreement up front, you know what your pricing is, and you can tell the voters, this is all in $3 billion. This isn't $3 billion of capital expenditures and then another $2 billion over the next 30 years to maintain this. And again, de-risking the political risk, de-risking the project, that's what it's all about. So with that, I think I'll just wrap up, but I had a couple more things in here valid to look at. We'll make these PowerPoints available to you all so you can have some of this additional content. But that all wrap up.
We'll go directly, thank you very much, Joel. You can see why Joel's in demand all over the country to provide the strategic independent advisory services that he does. The next speaker.
Hold the mic up.
I'm trying to, is that on? Is that on?
Yep.
Okay. The next speaker, you probably know him, but might not be named by name. There's this picture of Governor Weld and this other guy jumping into the Charles, right, fully clothed. Well, that is Robert Durand. Robert Durand, former state senator, former secretary of environmental affairs. And people asked me when I indicated that we were planning this, that I wanted Bob Durand to present on the environmental bonding bill. They said, no, get the chair of this joint committee or get somebody from the administration to talk. I said, no, I've been up in the legislature. The legislature is like making sausage. There's this perspective you want to hear. You don't want all the political shining that goes on when they talk about these things. You want to know what really goes on there and what this really means. And Bob is just one of those really intelligent public servants that has become advisor to the smartest and most intelligent people that want representation on the Hill. He's been doing it for a while with his partner, Mr. Anastas, and he's the best. So he's going to tell you the true story about the environmental bonding bill. Bob.
Thanks, Bill. Use this over here?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm not a PowerPoint guy, so I'm just going to work up my notes. So it's too late turn in the hip boots, put on the waders, or maybe even the life jacket. 9 inches in 2035. It's incredible. 21 inches by 2050. And 3 or 4 feet by the end of the century. That's incredible. So we're a little bit behind the ball, and I think I want to give Bill credit for being proactive and seeing this problem a lot earlier on. He's been working at it now for a while, and coming up with those big ideas that are really important. You know, I chaired the MWRA board for a number of years when I was secretary, and to get that kind of agreement is going to take a lot of work. There's 61 cities and towns with a very strong advisory committee and a lot of legislators involved. That would take an incredible amount of work. Not saying it's impossible, but it's definitely something worth pursuing for sure. So thank you very much for your foresight on that. We all appreciate that, and hopefully we can see some resolution come about in the near future, because it is getting too late. It was great to see my friends from the Charles River Watershed Association. As Bill mentioned, I was the guy who jumped in the Charles River with Governor Bill Weld in 1998. He was signing my bill, which was the Rivers Protection Act, that set up a 200-foot development-free zone along all rivers and streams in the Commonwealth. At the time, had I known about sea level rise and storm surge, I probably would have gone a little bit more aggressive on that 200 feet. Be it as it may, his jump into the Charles River, I didn't know if he could swim, so I jumped in after. My story about that is that John Kerry was running against Weld for U.S. Senate at the time, right? Kerry was the senator, Weld was running against Kerry. So, and I was a Kerry supporter. I've always been a Democrat. And, I do the jump, and about a week later, I get a framed photo of the leap into the Charles with a great note from Weld and the Rivers Act on this side. It's framed in my house to this day. And if you turn that frame around, there's a letter from Kerry saying, "Stay the hell out of the Charles River or Weld, you're losing me votes." And it's also another piece of legislation I worked on a number of years ago was the Community Preservation Act. And I know Boston is a CPA community, 271 cities and towns in the Commonwealth who have passed CPA. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that that might be a funding source for the future. As we try to protect our communities, and the whole goal of CPA was protecting the quality of life and allowing the cities and towns to determine where those funds would go between historic preservation, recreation, open space, and affordable housing. That may be a funding source. It's generated over $3 billion since it passed in the early 2000s. Another opportunity to take a look at a funding source. But Bill asked me here today to represent the issue of the bond bill. The governor, in her wisdom, early on when she first got elected, Governor Maura Healey and Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll from Salem, Mass, a coastal community, for those of you who know, early on recognized the problem with resilience and set up a resilience working group. They finalized that working group after 18 months, made a number of recommendations, and one of those recommendations is the MADDPA Act, the funding and the environmental bond bill that just recently passed the Massachusetts State Senate. It's Senate 3064, for those who want to take note. And I heard prior to arriving here today that the House is taking up the environmental bond bill, the MADDPA Act, sometime in the next 2 weeks, probably in the week after next is what I've heard. So for those of you who have contacts in the legislature, please contact them, urge them to pass it quickly. Thank the governor when you see her, thank the lieutenant governor for their input and their foresight on this important issue. Because a large part of the environmental bond bill addresses the issue of resilience. So what is a bond, right? Massachusetts state government funding comes from a mix of state taxes, voter-approved surtaxes, federal aid, and other revenue sources, with spending managed through an annual budget process. One of the significant sources of other revenues are bond funds, established by bond bills. So what is a bond bill? Bond bill is a legislative tool that allows the state government to borrow money for long-term investments in infrastructure, capital projects, and other significant public initiatives in Massachusetts. These bills are crucial for funding projects that the state cannot fund through its annual budget. Bond bills authorize the state to issue bonds, which are essentially loans that investors can make. The state then repays these bonds over time, typically with interest. This method enables Massachusetts to undertake substantial projects without needing immediate funding, spreading the cost over many years. Bond bills may focus on specific areas of investment, for example, such as roads and transportation, coastal infrastructure, as the case is here today. Massachusetts has for years also funded other investments, like open space protection. This year's environmental bond bill is known as the MassReady Act. The Ready Act, unveiled by the governor at $3.1 billion, and currently has grown to $3.9 billion since the Senate had an opportunity to take it up, includes authorization for a new 5-year capital funding plan alongside policy proposals aimed at strengthening climate resilience, protecting natural resources, improving access to open space, etc. The legislation is intended to fund infrastructure improvements, support port repairs, and integrate climate considerations into permitting, planning, and local decision-making. The bill also reflects the administration's strategy to manage changes in federal funding through increased authorizations and the creation of new programs that can offer alternative funding mechanisms. The bill funds a number of programs in different state agencies that are overseen by Coastal Zone Management, DCR, DFW, DEP, and Food and Agriculture. So when the bill was introduced, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation showed where those investments were going at $3.1 million. And 21% of this $3.9 billion now is going towards inland and coastal flooding. 21%, it's a huge number. Some of the proposed funding was designed to fund previous bond accounts. Billy mentioned areas that have been included in the past, like the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program. Very popular, as municipalities up and down the coast particularly have taken advantage of those grant programs. Other areas, remediating PFAS in private wells and wastewater, authorizations for biodiversity protection and open space. The funds expand investment in coastal infrastructure to $200 million. First authorized in 2014, expanded in 2018, this program funds projects to protect coastal areas from flooding and sea level rise through seawall repairs, beach nourishment, and nature-based solutions like living shorelines, but also port infrastructure. Informed by the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management, it supports public and approved private efforts with grants and loans aligned with climate adaptation goals. And I go through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program, but that's about $315 million that they will see through the grants across the Commonwealth, not only coastal communities, but other communities as well. There are also provisions related to preserving our working ports, and you heard earlier from Captain McCabe. I also represent my firm, Durand and Anastas Environmental Strategies, represents the Marine Alliance in defense of designated port areas. Mine McCabe talked about it earlier. Over 25 organizations, including Marine Society, Propeller Club, Peabody and Lane, third largest shipping company on the East Coast, Boston Shipping Association, Boston Towing and Transportation, Eastern Salt, and many others who are members of MADDPA. Early on, we were able to get language in the Environmental Bond Bill, the MassReady Act, to provide a special commission on our ports. Bill Well, when he was governor, endowed $65 million to port infrastructure improvements. Since then, there's been very little funds in that project. And so we don't have a master plan for our ports like we had years ago. And what this special commission will do is it'll develop a strategic vision for our ports in the Commonwealth. And particularly in these areas: Gloucester Inner Harbor, Salem Harbor, Lynn, Fall River, Mystic River, Chelsea Creek, East Boston section of the City of Boston, South Boston section of the City of Boston, Weymouth Fall River, New Bedford, Fairhaven, Quincy, and Mount Hope Bay. The Commission shall identify industry-specific opportunities and needs, assist existing infrastructure with capacity and resources, and develop recommendations to achieve stated priorities and goals. Specifically, they are limited to looking at commercial and recreational fishing, energy, shipping, bulk cargo and goods, transportation and tourism, ocean technology, and emerging markets. This commission is to report within 18 months after passing of the MassReady Act. So where is the bond bill now? As I mentioned, it's gone through the Senate, it's now in the House. What happens after the bond bill passes? The money is not readily available. It must go through on or before September 30th fiscal year calendar from July 1st to June 30th, and the treasurer announces the total amount of debt allowed to be issued in line with statutory direct debt limit. This is limited to 5% above the previous year's debt limit, and that has to be determined by December 15th of this coming year if it passes this year. The Capital Debt Affordability Committee holds meetings open to the public to review economic forecasts, to inform their advisory recommendation of the governor and the legislature about the total amount of debt that can be issued for the coming fiscal year. The committee's estimate must be available online and visible to the public. Each agency develops their own capital plan recommendations for the governor, and on or before January 15th of next year, the governor determines the total authorizations advisable for new state debt for the coming fiscal year. So we're not going to see the funds in the environmental bond bill probably until a good year from now, if we had to take a guess. But it is a start. And, you know, we've got an opportunity, I think, to address some of the issues that you've all talked about here today with the beginning of the bond bill and the funding that will proceed the bond bill. They will also leverage federal funds from the Army Corps of Engineers and other federal agencies. We have the opportunity, it is now. I'm hoping that the bond bill passes. I would urge all of you to thank Senator Nick Collins, Senator Sal DiDomenico, Senator Joan Lovely, who all worked very hard to help us get that language in the bond bill for both coastal residents and the Commission for the port infrastructure. And I don't know, I should have asked this question early on. Are there any representatives of either House or Senate members in the room? Do you want to please stand up and recognize yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Roberto Gomez. I'm with Nature Madara. Staff is not able to make it today, but we're here to
Thank him for the opportunity for, thank you very much for coming too, very important. I'd love to talk to you after this is over. This is the type of thing that we need to be doing, right? We need to be contacting the mayor's office, the legislature, the state reps and state senators, the governor's office, and to continue to push this agenda I want to thank you very much, Bill, for the opportunity to say a few words here today, and it's good to see some old friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So before introducing the last speaker, we've saved the best for last, and you'll see when you hear from Stefani, and focused on what may be the starkest warning of what we're facing here. But first, thank you, Bob. As you see, this is a substantial amount of money. $500 million to $700 million, depending on what gets put together, essentially for resiliency and work like that. But it is a drop in the bucket. It is a drop in the bucket. Those amounts will be available in about a year and will be spread over 5 years if they ever come to fruition. Because this is not cash that's being distributed now. This is authorization. Will the cash be used at that time? Well, it depends on our bond limits and everything at that point. But it is a huge gesture, a huge step forward by the governor, and the lieutenant governor, and the Senate, and hopefully soon the House, in the political will to get this ball going. It is a big step. Now, I'd like Rebecca Hearst to come up here and join the panel. Rebecca, are you still here? Yeah. Just if you could grab the chair there. And then, well, we're running late. But we're going to give Stefani a full opportunity to present. Her presentation is very important. Stefani is one of those bright lights in the constellation of engineering and planning capacity that we have in this state. She works for Stantec. She's a senior associate in their water division. And we stole her from San Francisco, right, Stefani? She worked for the Public Utilities Commission in San Francisco. So it is a great pleasure. I've worked with her. We put together, Stantec and ESI put together a milestone report that came out in January on all these issues. We'll talk to the transition from planning to action. We'll post that on the Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, as we will all these things. So it is my great pleasure to have Stefani, and Rebecca will be making an announcement on the behalf of the Blue Ribbon Commission after this. Stefani?
All right, thanks very much for inviting me to speak today, Bill, and thank you all for staying to the bitter end. I'm sure you're all hungry, so I'll try not to go on for too long. We have talked about Massachusetts being a little lucky here, right? Like, we've escaped the degree of catastrophe that some of our coastal urban peers have experienced. So we're not always going to be lucky. So we're right now at a crossroads. We're at a decision point. We need to either shift from planning to implementation, or we can delay. And the purpose of this presentation is to investigate a little bit about what is the cost of delaying. So the cost of delay, on one hand, construction will get more expensive over time. So I'm going to, inflation, we're talking about inflation, but construction-specific inflation is higher than standard inflation. And that, coupled with uncertain availability of federal funding, can create kind of a funding crisis. Political will can move on. We have garnered some political will now. We don't want to lose that congressional support for legislation, because that can help us with funding and institutional arrangements or other things that need to be done through legislation. And thirdly, the weather events won't wait. So if we choose to delay, or if we delay by default, we end up with flood damages and flood impacts from storms that are going to come while we're delaying. We have increasing frequency and severity of storms. With that, rising insurance costs, and increasing competition for federal disaster response assistance, which may be dwindling as well. And of course, we have to acknowledge the potential for loss of life. So as we think about our future, we should think about moving towards resilience, so we're not in a position that we're paying once for the damages and the impacts and all of these things, the rising insurance, and then we're paying again to make ourselves resilient. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 of these categories only, because we could do whole presentations probably on each of them. And I'm just going to do a quick dip into inflation, construction inflation, and then spend a little bit of time on flood impacts, flood damages and flood impacts, and the costs associated. So for construction inflation, what I'm hoping these graphs show is data for things that you already know. So this is looking at inflation year over year, annual inflation. And what you see in the dark black line is the consumer price index. That's the CPI. That's often what's considered a benchmark for inflation. But what you see, all the other lines on the graph are different construction indices. And what you see is that they're more volatile than the CPI. So you see higher peaks and lower troughs. And when things are not volatile, when things are fairly smooth, even then they're still above the CPI index. So over this period, 2011 to 2025, we have an average annual inflation, just kind of averaging out all that noise to take a look at it. And you can see that CPI again is black, and all of the construction indices are significantly higher than CPI on an average annual basis. And then we can translate that into the cost of delay for what $100 in 2010 was worth at the beginning of this period in 2010 versus what it was worth by 2025. Now, because we're talking about flood resilience, let's just pretend that says $100 million instead of $100. And what you see is that the CPI would inflate that to about $150, whereas the construction indices go well above that. So the bottom line here is that it is expensive to delay, but it is especially expensive to delay when you're talking about construction. So let's see, I'm going to pivot now to flood damages. So how do we think about flood impacts and the cost associated with flood impacts? The benefit cost analysis gives us a framework for that. The premise is that, in simple terms, if the benefit is greater than the cost, then it's a worthwhile project. And in the world of flooding, we tend to think about benefits as avoided damages. So if you build a protection, then you're not seeing the damages that would result if the protection weren't there. So I'm talking about the cost of delay, but I'm also going to be talking a lot about benefits, kind of flood benefits, a little bit interchangeably. So the federal agencies each have their own frameworks for benefit cost analysis, right? And they have identified sort of core benefit categories or avoid damages categories for flooding that line up with their own objectives. And so this is a good starting point, right? But it's not the end of understanding the cost of delay. So you cannot ignore these core categories. So FEMA, for example, tends to really focus on avoided damages to structure and contents. That tends to be where the big benefits come in from flood protection. If you're working in an area where you have maybe some key transportation corridors that go under a railroad, for example, one of the towns that I work with in Massachusetts has a number of rail crossings because the commuter rail bisects north-south of the town, and all of the crossings are underpasses. So when it floods, they all fill with water, and suddenly you've lost your critical lifelines. So there's tools in these toolkits that the feds have provided to evaluate the cost of no action. However, you are allowed to complete your benefit cost analysis and add benefit categories that reflect the values of your community. So for example, impacts to businesses, social valuations, impacts to the environment. You can't ignore the benefit categories that are there because you need them for the grant, but you can add your own local flavor and priorities. So I'm going to go into two of these. I'm going to talk about a case study from San Francisco where we looked at the impacts to businesses, and then a case study from here in Boston where we looked at social valuation. So as Bill mentioned, before I was with Stantec, I was with San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. I was the senior project manager for flood resilience, and we undertook a study to look at the current level of flood protection provided by the city and the benefits and costs associated with providing higher level of flood protection. It was very infrastructure focused on the cost side, but on the benefit side, we tried to capture a very holistic picture of the benefits to the community. So let's see, so the overall conclusion of that study was that building to a greater level of flood protection, and by the way, let me just back up a step. This is not a FEMA floodplain. San Francisco is hills on a peninsula. This is sort of internal drainage-related flooding as water ponds in low spots. So it doesn't map to FEMA floodplains. This is outside of FEMA floodplains. So the overall protection was that for the city to provide a greater level of protection to very large storm events, the benefit cost ratio went down. So, I'm not going to go into that today because we're talking about the cost of delay, but if you are interested in seeing that, I have it at the end of the presentation. We'd be glad to talk about it more. This graph is showing the levels of service increasing from left to right on the bottom, and what it shows from 0 to 100% is the damages, the flood damages by category. So you can see we assessed a large number of categories, tried to be as comprehensive as we could, but at the end of the day, blue, green, and orange on the graph are the traditional property damages, and they definitely took the lion's share of the benefits analysis. The gray band at the top, about the remaining 10%, was 9 of the benefit issue areas. But what was a little bit surprising to us was the business impacts. It was surprisingly strong, that purple band, and especially in large storms. The way we looked at business impacts was we mapped regional businesses against flooding, and we took data that was available on sales revenue, tax revenue, and employee wages. This is not double dipping. This is what Charlie was talking about in his presentation, where you look at the holistic impacts to the entire community. The person who can't go to work, and then the shop that loses its revenue, and then the city that loses its tax revenue as an overall impact. And we found that businesses were surprisingly strong. Now I'm gonna jump over to Tinian Beach. Stantec sort of expanded the BCA to include social damages for a brick application, which was selected and is currently pending award. So the project itself is elevated roadways and beaches to protect a critical pathway, highly residential area inland. The way the social damages were calculated was census data was used to identify the vulnerable populations in the flooded areas. So you can see from the table here, there's 224 buildings, which based on building type, residential building type, was translated to 356 households. So from that, you can identify a population by residents per household, and a population who works, which is 54.6% of residents. And this is all census-based. But the idea here is that the residents who live in these buildings are affected by mental health and stress of flooding, and the residents who live in these buildings who are employed may have loss of productivity. And there are FEMA standard values for economic values for assessing per person, so that was applied here. And what you see in the bottom table is that the social benefits actually tipped the scales to make the BC ratio positive. In this column right here, the 7% discount rate, you see the property benefits were 14, the social added another 6 to get to 20, which tipped the scales so that the benefits were higher than the costs, and the BC ratio was positive. Another thing I just wanted to highlight here is that this was in a 7% discount rate category. Within this grant application period, OMB changed the discount rate from 7% to 3%. Like, these are the variables that are kind of out of our control, so when we think about benefits and calculating benefits, we need to be as exhaustive as we can, because we don't have control over everything that might happen on the federal government side. So just a sense of what social benefits can add to the picture here. When we think about benefit cost analyses, we're talking about annualized costs, but in reality, the costs of storms are not spread out evenly. So other than this theoretical example, I'm going to talk a little bit about a historical approach of thinking about the cost of delay, right? So this is the top 12 costliest storms as compiled by NOAA. And these are inflation-adjusted numbers, so the year should not matter. But take a look at what you see here. Other than Andrew in 1992, right? Everything else on the top 12 list has happened in the last 2 decades.
That's stark, right? So this is just the top 12 list. This is just the biggest ones, but let's look at what's happening year on year. Also compiled by NOAA. What you see in the bars here is the number of billion disasters per year. It's on the left-hand scale. And what you see on the red line is the total cost in an individual given year. So you can really see Hurricane Katrina right here. And then what you see in the black line is the 5-year trailing average of the red line. So that just tells you a little bit more of a trend without so much noise. And what you can see is that pre-Katrina, we were looking at about $7 billion events per year, right? In the last 10 years, in the 10 years following Katrina, we were seeing about $10 to $12 billion events per year. And in the last decade, it's always more than $12 billion events per year, up to $27 or $28 billion events in the last 2 years that are in this data set. So that is stark. That tells us the costs for these events are now in the hundreds of billions of dollars nationwide, just for these largest billion-dollar events, right? And because there's more events, more discrete events happening, there's more communities that are raising their hand for those federal relief dollars. So the question here is how many disasters can and will be supported in the future? All right, so we're back to the same crossroads. We've talked about a few ways that delays can impose costs on a community. We didn't talk about a number of them: rising insurance, federal funding uncertainties. There could be whole dissertations on these things, but they would all lead you to the same conclusion, and that is, at this crossroads, we need to take the right fork, right? We need to go to the right. Let's not wait for the next storm and then pay for the damages and then pay again to become resilient. The cost of delay is very high, and it's time to build.
Thank you. Okay, so the hard is that on? No, this is back here. The hard work is in the details. You saw the numbers there. They are stark. And it takes people like Stefani, who does this day in and day out, as well as the other speakers you've heard, to actually do the hard work that gets us from planning to action. What I'm going to do now is Rebecca Hearst, I've asked her to just make an announcement about the Blue Ribbon Commission. There's always an entity that fights above its weight class. And in Boston, that is the Blue Ribbon Commission, led by my friend Bud Reese, and having recently gone as an associate director of the Green Ribbon Commission and as director of the resiliency, climate resiliency, this amazing talent, Rebecca Hearst. So, Rebecca?
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Hearst. As Bill said, I'm associate director of the Boston. It's actually the Green Ribbon Commission. But you know, we like
Blue Highway.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't want her. Sorry.
No problem. So the Green Ribbon Commission, as some of you may know, is a network of some of the largest institutions in Boston, some of the largest property owners, who came together at the request of then Mayor Menino and Amos Hofstadter to support the city of Boston and their climate action goals. And we recently announced, actually this week, that we're doing a project really to look at this, this question of how do we move to implementation and how do we pay for the investments that are necessary. So very on brand for this conversation. So wanted to just let you all know that we have launched this project, and over the next year, we'll be working on developing a coastal resilience financial blueprint for the city of Boston. We're working with a team of Arcadis, EY, Throw Environmental, and the Consensus Building Institute. Right now, we're analyzing the total cost of the necessary shoreline interventions, the benefits of doing those interventions, and what is the gap between our current available funding and where we need to go. And as Nayelli said, we know this is in the billions, and we really want to be able to take advantage of the Army Corps of Engineers project that is currently underway. as Joel was saying, there's this opportunity of saying, okay, if we're ready, if we have the plan, if we have the governance, if we're able to jump on federal funds, that accelerates things. So that's what this project is attempting to do. In the fall and winter of fall of 2026 and winter of 2027, we'll be having lots of different conversations, really looking at how do we fill that gap and trying to understand from people, what do you think is the most appropriate path forward? So please stay tuned, follow us on LinkedIn, or we'll be sending out information through various pathways, including Bill and Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, but really want to invite you to engage in these conversations and collectively figure out how can we move this forward together, because as we've discussed today, it's essential. Thank you.
Rebecca, that gives us even more hope. Thank you very much for your leadership there of the Green Ribbon Commission. Thank you. Questions? Anyone have questions? Okay. This one is pending from before. So, I'll try to.
Hi. So I wanted to move, since we're talking about the cost of delay, I think it's important to also talk about the cost of doing the wrong thing. The reason I mention that is because of my experience working with the resiliency, Boston resiliency, these little pocket studies that are being done neighborhood to neighborhood, looking at solutions. And it feels, and Mr. Paulsen pointed out that the Army Corps of Engineers are more in a follow rather than a lead mode at this point. And that was absolutely on display, where the Army Corps folks were totally following the lead of what the city wanted. And the city was communicating that they wanted what they believe the recommendation of the 2018 UMass study was, which was build local, close to the coastline seawalls in Boston, as opposed to doing a harbor study, whether harbor project, inner or outer, building seawalls and tie gates. I'm very concerned because taking a look at the economics, Mayor Walsh sort of put the kibosh on the outer harbor and inner harbor solutions because the price tag was 10 to 12 billion, and that was just too much. And caused sticker shock. These little local studies done by a different consulting firm have shown that each of the neighborhoods is going to spend about 1.5 billion for a seawall that is not going to have any firm control. Talk about creating thousands of points of failure and increasing the risk to an astronomical level, which the Army Corps sort of agree with, but they're moving forward because they seem to be under marching orders. And I think it's really important that we revisit what we're doing and whether or not a little constellation of $1.5 billion projects might not actually exceed the cost of a $12 billion project. So I was hoping folks could talk about that. I think that's one of the fundamental decisions that we need to make is, are we going to do something very local, or are we going to do something out in the harbor? Out in the harbor, I think, could be some sort of, it could be an MWRA project. If it's local, I believe it's going to be a BRA, BPDA project, and I think that they don't want to have their hands off of the project because they want to do what the BRA does, which is seize land. So I think that this is a very elemental struggle going on at this point, but we need to face it and understand that it's there, that it's the elephant in the room before we move on to implementation, because doing the wrong thing could be the most costly thing of all. Thank you.
I swear I did not plant that question, despite my agreement with the question. Rebecca, you want to address it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, the UMass study found that the cost of doing a harbor-wide barrier would be astronomically bigger than, much more than the cost of doing coastline interventions. And And the fact of the matter is that if we were to do a harbor-wide barrier, that would only protect us from the models that were looked at would only protect us from from the biggest storms, and it would not protect us from sea level rise and the high tide flooding that we're already seeing. And to permit it and build it would take 30+ years, which by that time we'll be seeing a huge amount of flooding on the coastline. So we would need to do the coastal interventions anyway. And if we do the coastal interventions strategically and intentionally, we can have local jobs, we can have more public access, and we can have protection sooner and as effectively, if not more so, than doing an enormous harbor-wide barrier. If we were to have a harbor-wide barrier that would be able to protect us from the coastal flooding, that would mean completely shutting off the harbor. And that was not a solution that...
Gates more often.
Those types of systems are only meant to be closed once or twice a year at the most. By the time that the project would be built, it would need to be closed over and over again. And the last thing that we would want to have happen is have a huge engineering feat get stuck, open or closed.
So Amsterdam only closes it?
Yes, yes, sir, very, very rarely.
And Venice only closes it?
I don't want to debate here.
Yes,
I'll-
sir.
I'll introduce
So
you.
so I'm happy to talk about that more. I was actually the project manager on that project. So happy to discuss it, but our finding was very clear that dollar for dollar, the investments made along the shoreline would allow for better jobs, more public access, much more quickly protecting the city that we love, and finding a way to move forward without losing the harbor and allowing us to continue to have the vibrancy of the coastline that we want.
So, first of all, let me say I respect this lady tremendously, and people that respect each other should be able to disagree. I know that's not in vogue these days, but so I do disagree profoundly on this. This study did not have any the barrier did not have any ecological effect. That was the finding of the study. No net ecological effect in the entire harbor for any environmental. They used the wrong data set, which was announced at an EBC. They used the wrong data set and underestimated the benefits by 100% in this study. They didn't do what's done in every other study, which is a layered defense, where you have a wall this big against low-lying areas where there's sea level rise, which would be less intrusive than what's being planned now. And you have, in addition, the Seagate system. And when the Seagate system was rejected, there was no plan B. There was none. Nobody knew what to do. That's the genius of what's been done by ClimateReady Boston, because they've come up with a plan B. And this gentleman's right. You add up the costs of all these fragmented pieces, and they are well beyond the cost of the entire project. So what I would submit as a challenge to the Green Ribbon Commission is to have a follow-up study. I would love to see a follow-up study, so all options are looked at, and there is no wrong. We may be wrong on this. I admit, we may be wrong. Also, the barrier was put in this study at the location, whereas if you're coming in from President Roads like this, you take a right turn to get in, and that's where the gate was. So it was a 1,500-foot gate, because it was not located it was located here. And the Boston pilots would have told you that they wanted a 1,500 gate because they had to take such an extreme turn that they thought they'd be coming in like this, like 5 Nimitz-class carriers, wing to wing. If it was moved in further, and this is what we should look at, you could approach it directly, it'd be less costly, and it would do something that's no plan to do, which is to protect Winthrop, our barrier beaches, and protect the harbor islands. So hopefully we can work together on these issues. In the meantime, I support everything that you're doing in the Green Ribbon Commission.
Thanks, Bill. I'll take a bit of a in-between stance on this, because there is some parallel to our project in Fargo. So we began building in-town levees and flood walls and pump stations. And we quickly realized that we were only going to be able to protect to the 50-year level. And that was the new hydrology. So we said, well, we need something more robust. So we actually integrated what we had already done in town into the design and operation of a larger diversion channel to bring floodwater around the community, but also run additional water through the main stem of the river as well. So we were able to have kind of a hybrid approach. And I told Rebecca this earlier today. I said, the diversion project only operates on a 100-year plus event, and there's never been a 100-year plus event recorded within the basin. So that means we just spent $3 billion on a robust system that would have never operated in the history of the data we have, which is only 100 years, right? A small snippet of time. But when the 100-year event does happen, we will have that available. And so I hope it never operates. But if it does, if we didn't have it, the entire community would be wiped out. So there may be a middle ground here where a barrier project makes sense for a significantly sized event like a Hurricane Sandy or something like that that would come in. But for sunny day flooding, coastal resiliency is maybe the answer. And so don't take one off the table at this point. Look at all options, and you want to have the most robust system that you can have that will cover the most events that you can have that's economically feasible.
Anyone else? Rebecca, do you want to?
No, I agree. I think we need, there we go. I think we need to be looking at all options. And what we know is that we're already experiencing sunny day flooding, and we need to be addressing those inland, those coastline interventions as quickly as possible so that we can be preventing those flood pathways from getting into the city. And you know, maybe long term we'll need to look at something much bigger, but we have plans to move. There's a lot of work to be done. And you know, as we were talking about the cost of delay, you know, the timing to wait 30, 40 years to like get the funding for, get the permitting, line up all of the line up everything to build an enormous infrastructure project like that doesn't make sense when we have projects that can be protective right now.
Any other questions? Yeah. The Margaret before us from Quincy.
You're very kind, Bill. Maybe Rebecca, for you, when you're talking about the Army Corps studies and in the cost share, and you're referencing Boston Harbor, are you referencing Boston, the municipal borders, or you're representing Boston Harbor? And if so, would the other coastal communities within Boston Harbor, such as Quincy and Hull, have opportunity for inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. I have to be more patient when I'm turning on the mic. Sorry, everybody. So the current Army Corps project that is underway, and I think Kate Russo left from the city of Boston. She's the one who's managing this project, but she was here earlier, is looking specifically at alignments within the city of Boston. It's not looking at other cities and towns. There was a regional Army Corps project as well, and I'm not actually sure the status of that one. So I believe that the broader, obviously there's flood risk all along the Massachusetts coastline, but the project that I was referring to was specifically within the municipal boundaries of Boston.
One last question. That's not.
Yeah. Well, I won't have a question. I'll have just an announcement about another funding mechanism, but so I can just go last and say that. Yeah.
And then everybody's going to be here. That's here, still here, to talk to. So I urge us. You know, we have this room till 1 o'clock, so we can continue to network.
So I'll say I agree with everybody. So the reality is I agree with that kind of hybrid approach that you're talking about, Joel. My question is, how do we bridge that gap between a long-term strategy, which we have to work on now, with a short-term strategy that will make sure we do the right things in the interim that are not gonna then conflict with a longer term strategy. I have clients that I'm representing that have BPDA, BRA, decisions that were made 10 years ago. They now are in front of the Conservation Commission and they get a pass. And when I say, geez, I didn't, what's the story about all these conditions from BRA, BPDA, their answer is, oh, well, that's based on whatever their letter is. There's so much time spent when you get micro at managing agencies and trying to find regulation that you need help on the short-term strategy. How do we bring those two together so that somebody like me, where we're trying to do the very best thing at the right time, gets hooked in appropriately, that I'm not like, when I leave here, man, I am like busting to get my testimony done. How do we do this so that I know both long-term and short-term, and I do a better job representing, the salt marsh or the beach when they want to try to do something now and not conflict with the future?
Thank you very much. Joel?
Well, yeah, I'll address a part of that because we struggled with that as well. And the Corps of Engineers looked at over 200 potential options to provide regional flood protection on our project. And we ultimately ended up choosing one, and there was opposition from different groups, different agencies, different states even, that we had to work through. But at the end of the day, it was about doing something. Even if it wasn't the best idea, if everyone didn't think it was the best idea, but it was taking that engineering approach to say, we need to do something as quick as possible because the risk is there and the risk is real. And that's better sometimes than not doing anything because nobody can decide on what is the best and what is not. But the key to all of that is to provide formats for public engagement and agency engagement, and don't leave anybody out. Everybody has to be at the table. We learned that the hard way. We left a group of individuals out that were negatively impacted by our project. They ended up filing suit. There was a federal injunction, delayed the project by 2 years. Every year we delayed that project was $65 million in construction costs. And so we spent $130 million waiting those 2 years because we didn't engage one group and we didn't listen to them. And we learned the lesson the hard way. So make sure everyone's at the table, whether you like their opinions or not. They get to voice them and they get to have a seat to collaborate.
So
yeah, and I was just going to say, and I think the other thing is having strategies that can be built on each other that are like meant to be modular or meant to, so that it's like, well, right now what we need is this. We know that in the future we're going to need this. How do we make sure that that can be integrated seamlessly?
So before we take the last question, we all stand on the shoulders of giants that have gone before us. And the giant in this room that we all stand on the shoulders of is a woman named Vivian Lee, who's in the back there. Vivian, before anything about the harbor or about infrastructure necessary or urban planning, Vivian was on the forefront, a leader regardless without fear or favor, who has driven this project for many years. I won't say how many years, Vivian, but the founder of Boston Harbor now, and that was just one of many accomplishments. So I want to thank her personally for everything that has come since then, because it wouldn't be possible without you, Vivian. Thank you. I also want to thank this lady over here, Susan Bryant, who is doing this on a volunteer basis. Susan does video and audio professionally. She's a resident of Hull. She gets up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock with my good friend Wolfie, Craig Wolf over there, and goes out in a big boat and rows. But she also spends the summer along the Cohasset beaches with kids. And they do things like drop in GoPros in the water and pick them up the next day to see what was happening during the day and night, and educates kids. at a level that is building all of our future leaders, which will be up here in the panel someday, Susan. So thank you for everything you do. Now, we'll go to the last question. And then we have a final announcement.
Yeah. And thank you. And again, this is not necessarily a question, but I was just felt like it was important for me to be able to share this information with you all, because I'm looking around, I'm like, I don't know if anyone else here would be a holder of this information related to funding mechanisms. So I think a lot about the work that I do at CREW as really mitigating the harms from different industries that are causing the harms and creating the work that we have to do in the world. And so a lot of what CREW is a part of, in addition to on-the-ground climate resilience projects and conversations in communities, is we are also a sister program within the organization Better Future Project, which is working on passing an act to create a climate superfund at the state level. Right now the bill is in the House. It's House Bill number 1014, and it's basically the Make Polluters Pay campaign. So the idea is to, be creating funding mechanisms that it's money coming from those who are causing the harm, creating a lot of the work that we have to do in the communities that we care about. So I just encourage people to check that out. Please feel free to reach out to the Better Future Project. Make Polluters Pay is the campaign. We've been passing municipal resolutions all over the state. Quincy's City Council just unanimously passed this resolution mid-May. A lot of coastal communities, Boston, Martha's Vineyard, I live in Somerville, and they unanimously passed this as well. So just definitely check that out. And then a parallel funding mechanism, again, is just thinking about how we can hold polluters responsible. Right now, CREW has funding to do depaving and land transformation projects in Framingham, and that is the result of a lawsuit settlement. The Attorney General's office turned to us at CREW and Better Future Project and said, we want to get you funding to do projects that are helping reduce harm and, ideally installing flood mitigation measures there. So just thinking about that, there's this act that you can help support, climate change, Superfund bill. And then again, thinking about working with groups like the Attorney General's office. I heard Andrea Campbell say this at a recent conference. Hey, we have a whole mechanism for this. Please reach out to us, libraries, emergency responder groups, schools, if you are looking for funding, because these lawsuit settlements are also a creative way to get funding in your communities to do the work that you want to do.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you give your name?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, my name is Lee Munier.
Thank you. Better Future is a great group to follow and to watch, and they're leading in very effective ways in the state. I'm going to finish this off by saying there are two steps, immediate steps that we are going to take. About maybe 4 years ago, we held a conference on Beacon Hill in the State House. About 130 senators, reps, and staff attended, focused on creative and innovative funding means for infrastructure. We are going to do that again with some leadership from the back here and from the front. And we're going to do something else. We're going to ask you, all of you, and we'll be in touch with you, to participate in evaluating and selecting the pilot projects that we are going to start funding and transfer from planning to action. So this group will be that group that leads in that effort. The very last thing we're going to ask you to do is all come up to the front. I want a picture, because this is where it started, and you stayed to the end, and I want to show who is really leading in this organization. So all come forward. You guys come out in front here, and we'll take a picture. Come on, don't be shy. Come on, boys. Let's go. Mike, let's lead up here. Larry, we need some high candy here. Get up here. Okay, we gotta pull together, be friendly. Okay, we're in. Let me kind of squeeze in here.
Can you use mine as well?
Vivian, come right up here. Vivian, come right up here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. If you want. Okay.
I can like, I also can like.
Well, let's step forward, let's step forward,
I
step
also
forward,
can
step
like,
forward.
I also can like.
Can everybody get around in the back here, everybody that's back there?
You said you guys want to come around.
Just go here.
Okay. All right.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
This is where it
Or I also
starts.
can like.
Insurance question. High school graduation.
Get a panoramic.
Isn't it good or bad?
It's good.
It's the newest.
You're gonna have to take this picture and send it to everybody.
Thank you. Well,
He's back.
I think if you were here, we'll get some stuff.